I came home 3 days early. My daughter was gone. My wife said she was at her grandma's place. There at 2 a.m., I found my granddaughter in the backyard, standing in a hole, crying. 4 degrees below zero. I picked her up. She whispered, "Dad, don't look in the other hole." I am Thaddeus, Iron Collier, 72 years old, and I have spent my life building things that last. Foundations, walls, roofs, things that keep the storm out. But nothing I ever built could have prepared me for the demolition job being done on my own family. Before I tell you what was buried in that backyard, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect your own blood from a wolf in sheep's clothing. The windshield wipers of my Ford F-150 were fighting a losing battle against the Minnesota blizzard. It was 2 in the morning, and the highway was a graveyard of white silence. I was supposed to be in Chicago for a shareholders meeting, a final formality before I officially sold my construction firm and retired. But the storm had grounded all flights and canceled the meeting, so I drove back. I wanted to surprise Beatrice. My wife of 40 years was the only person in the world who could make a retired bricklayer like me feel soft. She was the warmth in my life, and tonight I needed that warmth. The thermometer on the dashboard read 15 degrees below zero. My knees ached. The metal plate in my shoulder from a job site accident in '92 was throbbing. The cold has a way of reminding you of every mistake you ever made and every bone you ever broke. I pulled up to the gate of our property. We live out in the suburbs on 2 acres of land surrounded by pine trees. I bought this land when folks said a black man couldn't in this neighborhood, and I built the house with my own hands, brick by brick. But as I approached the driveway, my headlights caught something that made my stomach turn over. The heavy iron gate was standing wide open, swinging violently in the wind. Beatrice never left the gate open. Never. She was a woman of habit. Lock the doors, set the alarm, leave the porch light on for me. But tonight the porch was dark. The entire house was a massive black silhouette against the gray storm clouds. No lights in the windows, no smoke from the chimney, just a dark, dead structure waiting in the snow. I killed the engine, but I did not get out immediately. I sat there listening to the wind howl and the engine block tick as it cooled. My heart started to hammer against my ribs, not from fear, but from an instinct I had not felt since I was a young man, working on sites where people stole tools and cut corners. Something was wrong. I reached into the glove box and pulled out my Smith & Wesson. It was cold against my palm. I checked the chamber. 1 round ready, 6 in the magazine. I am not a violent man, I am a builder. But you do not survive 72 years in this world without knowing how to defend what is yours. I stepped out of the truck and the wind hit me like a physical blow. It bit through my coat and stung my eyes. I moved toward the front door, keeping low, avoiding the icy patches on the walkway. The house loomed over me, silent and imposing. I tried the front handle, locked. I fumbled for my keys, my fingers stiff and clumsy inside my leather gloves. When I finally got the door open, I expected the familiar rush of warm air, the smell of Beatrice's lavender potpourri, or the hum of the furnace. Instead, I was greeted by a wall of freezing air. It was colder inside the house than it was in my truck. The silence was absolute. No refrigerator humming, no floorboards creaking, just the hollow sound of the wind outside. I flipped the light switch in the foyer. Nothing. The power was out. But that didn't make sense. If the power was out, the backup generator should have kicked in. I installed that generator myself 3 years ago. It runs on natural gas and starts automatically within 10 seconds of an outage, unless someone turned it off manually. "Beatrice," I called out. It. Voice sounded small in the high-ceilinged hallway. No answer. I moved deeper into the house, the beam of my tactical flashlight cutting through the gloom. The furniture was casting long, distorted shadows. The living room was empty. My leather recliner sat there like a ghost. The photos on the mantel were watching me. I checked the thermostat on the wall. The display was blank. The system had been shut down completely. My breath was visible in the air, puffing out like white smoke. Then I saw it. Through the large sliding glass doors at the back of the living room, a light was shining. It was the floodlights in the backyard. They were on blindingly bright, illuminating the snow like a stage. Why was there no power in the house, but the exterior security lights were blazing? The sliding door was open slightly, just a crack, letting the snow drift onto my hardwood floors. The curtain was flapping wildly like a distress flag. I moved to the door, gun raised, stepping over the dusting of snow on the carpet. Looked out. The backyard was a vast sheet of white, but in the center near the old oak tree the snow had been disturbed. There was a pile of fresh black earth. It looked like a wound on the white surface of the world. Someone had been digging. I squinted against the glare of the floodlights. At the bottom of that fresh pile of dirt, there was a hole, and inside that hole something was moving, a small patch of pink against the mud. My heart stopped. It was a pink winter jacket. The one I bought for Chloe, my 8-year-old granddaughter, last Christmas. Chloe. I did not think I just moved. I slid the door open and ran out into the storm, forgetting the ice, forgetting my bad knees. The wind tried to push me back, but I lowered my shoulder and charged through the snow. The snow was deep up to my shins, but I didn't feel it. All I could see was that small figure in the ground. When I reached the edge of the hole, I looked down, and what I saw broke me into pieces. Chloe was standing there in a pit about 3 feet deep. She was shivering so hard her teeth were chattering, a sound like dice rattling in a cup. She was holding a small plastic garden shovel, the kind kids use to build sandcastles at the beach. Her face was streaked with tears, but the tears had frozen on her cheeks. She was frantically trying to scoop dirt back into the hole onto her own boots. She was murmuring something over and over again, a rhythm of panic. Grandpa. I dropped my gun into my pocket and jumped down into the hole with her. The impact jarred my spine, but I didn't care. I wrapped my big coat around her, pulling her small, freezing body against my chest. She was like a block of ice. I got you, baby. I got you. Grandpa is here. She looked up at me and her eyes were wide, pupils dilated with terror. She didn't look like a child anymore. She looked like a war victim. She grabbed the lapels of my coat with a strength that shouldn't have been possible for an 8-year-old. You have to help me fill it. Grandpa? She stammered, her voice cracking from the cold. He said I have to fill it or Mommy won't come back. Who said that, Chloe? Who put you out here, Daddy? She whispered. Daddy said I was being bad. He said I talk too much. He said I need to learn to be quiet like the snow. Rage, unlike anything I have ever felt, surged through my veins, burning hotter than the freeze. It wasn't just anger. It was a primal need to destroy whatever had done this to her. Gavin, my son-in-law, the man I had never trusted, the man with the shiny smile and the empty eyes. I looked at her hands. They were red, raw, without gloves. She had been out here digging in the frozen earth with a plastic toy. We are going inside, Chloe. Now! No! She screamed, trying to push away from me, struggling back toward the dirt. No, Grandpa, he said. I have to finish. He said if I finish the hole, I can go inside. But if I stop, you are done digging, I said, my voice dropping to that low tone I used when I ran construction crews. The tone that meant no arguments. I swept her up into my arms. She weighed nothing. She was frail, small for her age, and trembling so violently it shook my own body. I climbed out of the hole, clutching her tight, shielding her face from the wind. I started walking back toward the house, my boots crunching heavily on the snow, needing to get her to warmth, needing to find Beatrice, needing to find my shotgun. But then Chloe grabbed my face. Her frozen fingers burned my skin. She pulled my head down so her lips were right against my ear. Grandpa, she whispered, and the terror in her voice stopped me dead in my tracks. What is it, baby? Dawn. Look, she sobbed. Dawn, look at what? Dawn, look in the other hole. I froze, standing there in the middle of the yard, the wind howling around us like a pack of wolves. Other hole. I turned my head slowly, following the direction of her gaze. About 20 feet away near the tool shed, there was another mound of dirt, another disturbance in the perfect white snow. It was longer, darker, covered partially by a blue plastic tarp that was flapping in the wind. The shape of it was unmistakable. It wasn't a hole for a child. It was a hole for an adult, and unlike Chloe's hole, this one looked full. I looked at the dark windows of my own house, the house I built to keep my family safe, and I realized I was just walking into a crime scene. I was walking into a trap, and the trap had already sprung. My grip tightened on Chloe. I felt the weight of the gun in my pocket. and for the first time in 40 years I didn't feel like a builder anymore. I felt like a destroyer, and I was ready to tear this whole world down to find out what was under that blue tarp. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, but I am not a man who runs. I am a man who stands his ground even when the ground is shaking. My granddaughter Chloe was clinging to my leg, her face buried in the rough denim of my jeans, shivering so violently that her tremors traveled up my own spine. She had told me not to look in the other hole, but how could I not? A man does not walk away when he smells smoke in his own house. But first, I had to secure the innocent. That is the first rule of safety on any job site. Protect the vulnerable before you deal with the hazard. I scooped Chloe up again, ignoring the sharp stab of pain in my rotator cuff. I carried her back to my truck, the engine still rumbling like a faithful beast. The heater was blasting inside, creating a sanctuary against the Minnesota freeze. "Listen to me, Chloe," I said, looking into her terrified eyes. "I need you to stay in here. Lock the doors. Do not open them for anyone. Not for your father. Not for your mother. Only for me. Do you understand?" She nodded, mute and pale. I put her in the passenger seat and watched her small hand slap the lockdown. I checked it from the outside. It held. Good. My truck is an old Ford built with steel thicker than the cars they make today. It was a vault. I turned and faced the backyard again. The walk back to that second hole felt like the longest walk of my life. The wind was picking up, howling through the pine trees, sounding like a chorus of mourning women. The snow was knee-deep now, and my boots felt heavy as lead, but I forced myself to move one step at a time. The floodlights were still blazing, casting long, grotesque shadows across the yard, creating a stage for a tragedy I was not ready to witness. I reached the spot Chloe had pointed to. It was near the old tool shed, a place where I used to sharpen my saws and fix the lawnmower. There was a mound of dirt larger than the one Chloe had been standing in. It was covered by a heavy blue tarp weighed down at the corners with bricks. The tarp was snapping in the wind, making a sound like a whip cracking against the air. I stood over it for a moment, my breath clouding in front of my face. My hand went to the gun in my pocket, but I did not draw it yet. I needed to know what I was dealing with. I needed to see the face of the nightmare. I reached down my leather glove, gripping the freezing plastic edge of the tarp. I pulled it back. The world stopped. The wind stopped. The cold stopped. All I could feel was a void opening up in the center of my chest, a black hole that swallowed 40 years of memories in a single second. It was Beatrice. My wife. My partner. My conscience. She was lying in the shallow grave, her body curled slightly to the side as if she were just sleeping. But she was not sleeping. Her skin, the beautiful dark skin I had kissed every morning for 4 decades, was an unnatural shade of gray dusted with frost. She was wearing her nightgown, just thin cotton against the sub-zero air. No coat, no shoes. Whatever had happened, they had dragged her out here straight from her bed. I fell to my knees in the snow. The impact didn't register. I reached out and touched her cheek. It was hard, cold, like marble. Not like the warm, soft woman who had made me coffee just 3 days ago telling me to drive safe. A sound tried to claw its way out of my throat, a scream of pure animal agony, but I bit it back. I swallowed it down, turning it into fuel. Iron Thaddeus, they call me. Iron does not break. Iron gets harder when you beat it. I looked closer, forcing my builder eyes to see the details to analyze the structure of the crime. There was a bruise on her temple, dark and purple, ugly against her gray skin. But then I saw her hand. Her right hand was clenched tight against her chest, a fist frozen in rigor mortis. But she was holding something. Glinting in the harsh light of the floodlights between her stiff fingers was a silver object. It was a USB drive. I recognized it immediately. It was the encrypted drive I kept in the wall safe behind the painting in the study. The drive where I kept the backup ledgers for the company, the digital copies of my will, and the evidence I had been gathering on the corruption in the city zoning board. Why did she have it? Why was she holding it like it was a weapon? Because it was the only weapon she had left. She must have grabbed it before they got to her. She was trying to tell me something even in death. She was leaving me a blueprint. I reached out to take it gently, prying her frozen fingers apart. I whispered her name one last time, promising her that the fires of hell would seem cool compared to what I was about to rain down on the people who did this. I put the drive in my pocket next to my gun, and then the world went black. The floodlights cut out. Instantly, no flicker, just total darkness. The switch inside the house had been thrown. The sudden absence of light was disorienting, leaving me blind with the afterimage of my dead wife burning on my retinas. I didn't panic. Panic is for amateurs. I stayed low, crouching in the snow beside the grave, letting my eyes adjust, waiting for my hearing to take over. The wind was still howling, but underneath it I heard something else, the crunch of snow. Distinct, heavy, rhythmic footsteps. They were coming from the direction of the house. I shifted my weight, ready to draw my weapon, but my hand was numb and the heavy winter coat made me slow. And then a voice cut through the darkness. A voice I knew. A voice that had sat at my dinner table for 10 years, eating my food, drinking my wine, and calling me Pop. "You are home early. Thaddeus." A beam of a flashlight clicked on, blinding me. I squinted, shielding my eyes, seeing only a silhouette standing about 15 feet away. The figure was holding something long and metallic. It wasn't a gun. It was an aluminum baseball bat tapping rhythmically against a thigh. It was Gavin, my son-in-law. The failed real estate agent, the man with the handshake that was always a little too sweaty. He laughed, a dry, humorless sound that drifted away in the wind. I told Vanessa, "You were a tough old bastard." He took a step closer, swinging the light so it danced over the open grave, illuminating Beatrice's faces for a fleeting second, just to taunt me. "But you know what they say about old dogs? Thaddeus, eventually, they just need to be put down." I looked up at him from my knees, putting on the mask of a broken old man while my hand slowly inched toward my pocket. "You killed her," I said, my voice raspy, sounding older than I felt. "Accidents happen," Gavin said, shrugging his shoulders casually as if we were discussing a fender bender. "She slipped, Thaddeus, just like you are about to slip. The cold is dangerous for people your age. Heart attacks are so common in this weather." He raised the bat, resting it on his shoulder like a heavy hitter stepping up to the plate. He was confident. He thought he had the advantage. He thought he was looking at a grieving widower kneeling in the snow. He didn't know he was looking at a man who had just decided to turn this backyard into a cemetery for two. He stood there swinging that aluminum bat with a lazy arrogance that made my blood boil hotter than the engine of my truck. Gavin did not look like a murderer. He looked like what he was. A man who had never done a day of hard labor in his life, wearing a cashmere coat that cost more than my first car. He was smiling at me. Not a happy smile, but the pitying, smile you give a confused child or a dying animal. I stayed on my knees in the snow. My hand was still inside my coat pocket, gripping the textured handle of my Smith & Wesson revolver. My thumb hovered over the hammer. I had 6 bullets. Gavin was 15 feet away. I could drop him before he finished his swing. But I didn't pull the trigger yet. A wise man measures twice and cuts once. I needed to know the full shape of this demolition before I started swinging the wrecking ball. She slipped. "Thaddeus," Gavin said again, his voice smooth and practiced, as if he were rehearsing a pitch for one of his failed real estate ventures. "She went out to check the generator when the power died. The ice is treacherous back here. You know how fragile her hips were. She fell, hit her head on the stone planter. It was instant. We were just trying to figure out how to tell you without causing you a heart attack." Lies. I have been in construction for 50 years. I know the difference between a structural failure and a controlled demolition. Beatrice had a bruise on her temple that was perfectly round, the exact size of the knob on the end of that bat Gavin was holding, and nobody wraps an accident victim in a blue tarp and buries them in the backyard at 2 in the morning, unless the accident was murder. I slowly stood up, my knees popping loudly in the cold air. Gavin tensed slightly, lifting the bat an inch higher, but he didn't attack. He was waiting for me to break. He was waiting for the senile old man to cry or collapse. But I stood tall. I let the wind hit my face, forcing my expression to remain as hard as granite. "If it was an accident," I said, my voice steady, low, scraping against the silence like a shovel on concrete. "Why is my granddaughter digging a hole? Why is my wife under a tarp? Why didn't you call 911? Gavin sighed, shaking his head as if he were disappointed in me. "You are confused. Thaddeus, this is exactly what the doctor warned us about. Your mind is going. You are seeing things that aren't there, paranoid. Delusions, just like Vanessa said." And then the sliding glass door behind him opened again. The sound of the track rolling was loud in the night. I looked past Gavin, expecting to see a monster or an accomplice. Instead, I saw the person I had carried on my shoulders when she was small enough to fit in my tool bag. "Vanessa." My daughter stepped out onto the snowy patio. She was not wearing a coat. She was wearing a silk blouse that looked ridiculous in the freezing wind. Her face was perfectly made up, not a hair out of place. No tears, no red eyes, no grief. She looked at me the way a banker looks at a foreclosed property. Cold, calculating. But what froze the blood in my veins wasn't her expression. It was what she was holding. In her hands, leveled at my chest, was my own Remington 870 pump-action shotgun, the one I kept locked in the gun cabinet in the basement, the one I taught her to shoot when she was 12 years old, telling her it was for protection against wolves. She held it with good form stock, tight against her shoulder finger outside the trigger guard. She wasn't trembling. She was ready. "Hello, Dad," she said. Her voice was devoid of warmth. It was flat, dead sound like a hammer hitting dry wood. "Put your hands where we can see them. Take your hand out of your pocket." Slowly, I looked at her, at the woman who had my eyes and her mother's nose, and I felt something inside me shatter. It wasn't fear. It was the final crumbling of the illusion I had built my life around. I thought I was building a legacy for them. I thought every brick I laid, every dollar I saved was a foundation for their happiness. But you can build the strongest house in the world, and it won't matter. If the termites are already inside the walls, eating the wood from the inside out. I slowly pulled my hand out of my pocket, leaving the revolver behind. I raised my empty, gloved hands, showing them my palms. The wind whipped around us, tearing at my clothes, chilling the sweat on my back. "Vanessa," I said, looking directly into her eyes, disregarding Gavin entirely. "Your mother is lying in the dirt 5 yards away. She is cold, Vanessa. She is dead. Do you not have anything to say to her?" Vanessa didn't blink. She didn't look at the blue tarp. She kept her eyes locked on me. Mom was tired. "Dad," she said simply. "She was tired of you controlling everything. She was tired of the penny pinching. She was tired of waiting for you to die, so we could finally live." The words hit me harder than the cold, waiting for me to die. The memory flashed in my mind, sharp and painful, like a strobe light. It was 2 weeks ago, sitting at the mahogany dining table. Vanessa had come over for dinner, bringing a stack of legal documents. She had pushed them across the table toward me, her hand resting on my arm with a feigned gentleness. "Dad," she had said back then, her voice dripping with fake concern, "you are getting older. You forgot to pay the utility bill last month. You are under a lot of stress. Gavin and I just want to help. Let us handle the finances. Sign the power of attorney just in case. It is for your own good. You are starting to slip, Dad. We all see it. You are becoming forgetful." I hadn't signed. I had torn the papers in half and thrown them in the fireplace, telling her that I was sharp enough to run a multi-million-dollar company and I was sharp enough to spot a hustle. She had left that night in a rage, storming out without saying goodbye. Beatrice had tried to calm me down, saying Vanessa was just worried, saying I should be easier on her. I should have listened to my gut. My gut told me then that she was worried about my health. She was worried about her inheritance. She didn't want to help me manage my money. She wanted to spend it. And now, standing here in the freezing dark, I realized the depth of the betrayal. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was a business transaction. The power of attorney hadn't worked, so they moved to Plan B, brute force. I looked past them toward the driveway. My truck was still running, puffing white exhaust into the night air. Chloe was inside, locked in that steel cage, safe for the moment, but for how long? I shifted my gaze slightly, and my heart sank. Gavin's massive black SUV was parked directly behind my truck, blocking the driveway. There was no way to reverse out. There was no escape route. He had boxed me in before I even knew I was in a fight. I did a quick calculation, strictly tactical, forgetting for a moment that these were my family. I had 6 rounds in my pocket. Vanessa had a shotgun, effective range of maybe 40 yards, but deadly at this distance. She had 5 shells in the tube, if I remembered correctly. Gavin had a bat, and he was young, strong, and desperate. I was 72 years old with a bad heart and a metal plate in my shoulder. But I had one advantage they didn't know about. I had built this house. I knew every inch of it. I knew where the shadows were deep and where the floorboards creaked. And I knew that bullies like Gavin and spoiled children like Vanessa had never been in a real fight in their lives. They were used to getting what they wanted by asking or taking. They weren't used to someone saying, "No, give me the keys to the truck." "Dad," Vanessa said, stepping off the patio onto the snow. Her high heels sank, but she kept coming, the shotgun never wavering. "We are going to take Chloe inside. She is freezing out there. We will call the police together. We will tell them it was a terrible accident. We will tell them you were confused and you found Mom like this. You want me to lie for you? I asked, lowering my hands an inch, inching closer to the warmth of my pocket. You want me to bury my wife and cover up her murder so you can collect the insurance money? Is that it? Is that what my life is worth to you? A payout. It is not just about the money, Gavin spat, stepping closer, swinging the bat aggressively. It is about freedom. Thaddeus, you have suffocated us for years, holding your money over our heads like a goddamn carrot, telling us to work harder, telling us to be like you. We don't want to be like you. We want what is ours, what is yours. I laughed, a harsh barking sound. It is all mine, Gavin. I built it, I earned it, and I earned. Are right about one thing, I am not going to be like me anymore. I am done being the provider. I looked at the spacing between them. Vanessa was to my left, 10 feet away. Gavin was to my right, 12 feet away. They had formed a triangle with me at the apex. It was a firing squad, and I was the target. I need to check on Chloe, I said, taking a step backward toward the truck. My hand brushed the pocket of my coat, gripping the revolver again. Stay where you are, Vanessa screamed, racking the slide of the shotgun. The sound was loud, distinct, terrifying. Chuck, chuck. It is the sound that means talk is over. It is the sound of imminent violence. I stopped. I looked at her, looking for any trace of the little girl who used to sit on my lap and ask me to read her stories. But that girl was gone dead and buried just like Beatrice. In her place was a stranger with greed in her eyes and a weapon in her hands. I realized then that there would be no negotiation. There would be no peaceful resolution. I couldn't talk my way out of this, and I couldn't buy my way out of this. The only way out was through. I looked at Gavin, then back at Vanessa, locking eyes with her one last time. You are right, I said softly, letting my shoulders slump, pretending to surrender, pretending the cold had finally beaten me. I am old, and I am tired. Vanessa relaxed slightly, just a fraction of an inch. The barrel of the shotgun dipped, lowered by maybe 2 degrees. It was a mistake, a rookie mistake, and it was the only opening I was going to get. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the biting cold air, tasting the snow and the betrayal, and I prepared to go to war with my own blood. The wind was screaming now, tearing through the trees like a freight train derailment, and it was the only thing covering the sound of my own heart hammering against my ribs. I was outgunned, I was outnumbered, and I was cornered. But I had one thing they did not have. I had experience. I knew that in every negotiation, in every fight, there is a moment where the balance shifts a split second, where arrogance makes you blind. Vanessa was holding that shotgun, but she was holding it like a trophy, not a tool. She thought the game was over. She thought she had already won. I decided to give her exactly what she wanted to see. I let out a gasp, a wet, guttural sound that didn't require much acting. My chest actually was tight, the stress and the cold squeezing my arteries like a vice. I clutched my left arm, staggering sideways, pretending to lose my footing on the ice. Dad, Vanessa took a step forward, but she didn't lower the gun yet. Her voice wasn't filled with concern. It was filled with annoyance, like I was inconveniencing her by dying too slowly. My pills. I wheezed, falling to my knees in the snow. I let my head hang low, chin to my chest, making myself look small, making myself look harmless, making myself look like a dying old man. My pocket. Vanessa. Please. I saw her boots crunching toward me through the periphery of my vision. She was cautious, but she was curious. Greed makes people stupid, and she was wondering if she could just let nature take its course and save herself a bullet. She wanted to see me expire. She wanted to be sure. Stay back, Gavin warned from behind her, but he was too far away to stop her. He was just a spectator, watching the lion tamer step into the cage. Vanessa stopped 3 feet in front of me. The barrel of the Remington 870 dipped just a few inches, pointing at my stomach instead of my chest. She leaned in, peering through the driving snow, trying to see my face, trying to see the life leaving my eyes. You brought this on yourself, Dad, she said, cold as the ice under my knees. You should have just signed the papers. That was the moment I didn't rise like an old man. I rose like a coiled spring, releasing 72 years of rage. I plunged my right hand into the snowbank beside me, grabbing a fistful of hard, icy powder, and in one fluid motion I threw it directly into her face while lunging for the barrel of the gun. Vanessa screamed, blinding white powder filling her eyes and mouth. She pulled the trigger reflexively. Boom! The shotgun roared, but the barrel was pointed skyward, the buckshot tearing harmlessly through the pine branches above us, ringing my ears and lighting up the night with a flash of orange fire. I got my hand on the barrel. The metal was hot, burning through my glove. I twisted it, trying to wrench it from her grip. Vanessa stumbled back, slipping on the ice, but she didn't let go. She was younger than me, and desperation gave her strength. We wrestled for the weapon, slipping and sliding in the deep snow, two shadows locked in a dance of death. "Let go!" I roared, kicking at her shin, aiming for the bone. I almost had it. I felt her grip loosening. I felt the stock of the gun coming toward me. Victory was inches away. And then my world exploded. I never saw Gavin moving. He must have closed the distance while I was grappling with Vanessa. The aluminum bat connected with my left shoulder, the same shoulder that had the metal plate from my accident in '92. Crack! The sound was sickening, like a dry branch snapping under a heavy boot. The pain was white-hot, blinding instant. It shot down my arm and up into my neck, paralyzing my entire left side. My knees buckled. The shock made me lose my grip on the shotgun. I fell backward, rolling into the snow, gasping for air, trying not to black out from the agony. "He is down!" Gavin shouted, his voice high and frantic, breathless with adrenaline. "Finish him! Ness, shoot him!" I looked up through a haze of pain. Vanessa was wiping the snow from her eyes, blinking rapidly, racking the slide of the shotgun. Clack, clack. She was bringing the barrel down to bear on me again. She wasn't hesitant anymore. She was terrified and terrified. People pull triggers. I couldn't fight not like this. My left arm was useless, hanging dead at my side. I needed cover. I needed a fortress. I rolled frantically to my right, away from the open yard and toward the structure looming beside us. The woodshed. It wasn't just a shed. It was a bunker. I had built it 5 years ago to store the seasoned oak I used for the fireplace. Heavy timber frame, reinforced concrete floor, solid oak door. It was 10 feet away. I scrambled on my knees in one good hand, clawing at the snow, moving like a crab, hearing the crunch of their boots behind me. "Hey!" Gavin yelled, charging again, raising the bat for a killing blow to my skull. I threw myself at the door of the shed, fumbling for the latch. It was a heavy iron latch forged by a local blacksmith. I yanked it up and the door swung outward, heavy and solid. Blam! The second shot tore into the wood frame right where my head had been a split second before. Splinters rained down on me, stinging my cheek. I dove inside, falling onto the pile of split logs, smelling the scent of dry wood and gasoline. I kicked the door shut with my boot just as Gavin reached it. Thud! The bat slammed into the outside of the door, shaking the frame. But the oak held. I scrambled up, ignoring the screaming. Pain in my shoulder, and slammed the heavy iron deadbolt home. I was safe trapped. But safe. "Open the door!" "Old man." Gavin screamed from the outside, slamming his body against the wood. "Open it, or we will burn you out!" I slid down the wall, sitting on the cold concrete floor, gripping my useless arm. My breath came in ragged gasps inside the small, dark space. It was pitch black in here, save for a thin sliver of light coming from under the door. The wind was howling outside, rattling the shingles. But inside it was quiet, quiet enough to hear them arguing. "Give me the shells," Vanessa was hissing. "You missed twice. My eyes are burning." He threw ice in my eyes. "You do it." I heard the sound of the shotgun being handed over. I heard footsteps crunching around the perimeter of the shed. They were circling, looking for a window, looking for a weakness. But I didn't build weak structures. There were no windows in this shed, only ventilation slats near the roof too small for a human to fit through. I was a rat in a trap, or so they thought. I closed my eyes for a second, forcing my breathing to slow down, forcing the pain in my shoulder to become just data, just another variable in the equation. My heart was still fluttering a dangerous rhythm, but I wasn't dead yet. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my lighter, flicking it on. The small flame danced, illuminating my prison rows of stacked firewood along the walls, bags of charcoal. And there on the back wall, my workbench. My eyes adjusted to the dim light and a grim smile touched my lips. They thought I was trapped in here with nowhere to go. They thought this was just a place where I kept wood. They forgot who I was. They forgot that before I was a businessman, I was a laborer. I was a builder. Hanging on the wall above the workbench, perfectly organized, were my tools: a chainsaw with a 20-inch bar, a sledgehammer, an axe sharp enough to shave with a crowbar. I was entrapped in a prison. I was locked in an armory. I struggled to my feet using the workbench for support. The pain in my shoulder was a constant throbbing reminder of Gavin's betrayal, but pain clarifies the mind. I looked at the chainsaw sitting there, yellow and black, smelling of oil. I checked the fuel bulb. It was full. Outside, the banging on the door stopped Dad. Vanessa's voice came through the thick wood, muffled but audible. "We know you are hurt. We know you cannot stay in there forever. It is 15 degrees below zero. You will freeze to death before morning. Just come out and we can make this quick. Make this quick." I laughed, a low, dry sound that hurt my chest. They wanted quick. They wanted easy. They wanted the inheritance without the work. I picked up the heavy logging chain from the corner, wrapping it around my good fist. I looked at the door, watching the handle jiggle as Gavin tried to force it. "I am not coming out." "Vanessa," I shouted back, my voice booming in the small space. "But if you want to come in, you are welcome to try. But remember one thing." I paused, listening to the wind. Listening to their silence, I built this shed, and I know exactly how to take it apart. I sat back down on a log, waiting, conserving my heat. My hand brushed against something cold on the floor, a plastic jerry can, red gasoline. The plan formed in my mind instantly. It was dangerous. It was reckless. It was something a younger man would call suicide. But I wasn't a young man. I was a man with nothing left to lose except his granddaughter. I looked at the gasoline, then at the chainsaw, then at the door. Let them try to break in. Let them try. I would show them the difference between a man who inherits power and a man who builds it from the ground up. The night was far from over, and the old wolf still had teeth. The flame of my lighter flickered, casting dancing shadows against the rough-hewn logs of the woodshed walls. Outside, the wind was still battering the door, and I could hear the muffled sounds of Gavin and Vanessa arguing, likely trying to find a tool to pry the heavy oak open. But inside my small wooden fortress, the silence was heavy, suffocating. It smelled of sawdust, gasoline, and something else, something faint and familiar like a ghost lingering in the air. It was the scent of lavender. My heart skipped a beat. Lavender was Beatrice's scent. It was the perfume she had worn since 1974. The smell that greeted me every evening when I came home from the construction site, shaking the dust off my boots. Why was I smelling it here in this freezing shed amidst the tools and the firewood? I moved the lighter slowly, my hand shaking, not just from the cold, but from a sudden dread. The small flame illuminated the back corner of the shed, behind a stack of seasoned oak logs. They're wedged between the wood and the wall was a leather object. It was a handbag. A high-quality brown leather handbag, the one I had bought for Beatrice in Italy 5 years ago. Why was it here? My mind raced, reconstructing the timeline. Beatrice had been found in the yard, buried under a tarp. Gavin said she slipped and fell by the generator. But if she fell, why was her purse hidden in the woodshed? She must have run. She must have been trying to get away. And she hid the evidence before they caught her. I crawled over to the bag, dragging my injured leg, wincing as the movement pulled at the shattered plate in my shoulder. I grabbed the strap and pulled it into the circle of light. My fingers were stiff and clumsy as I unzipped it. I dumped the contents onto the concrete floor. Her wallet, her keys, a pack of tissues, and a thick white envelope folded in half. I picked up the envelope. It was heavy. My name was written on the outside in her elegant cursive handwriting. Thaddeus, but the writing was shaky, hurried panic evident in every stroke. I tore it open, tearing through the paper with desperate hands. Inside were two things: a medical report from a private toxicology lab in Minneapolis, and a handwritten letter on her personal stationery. I looked at the medical report, first expecting to see a diagnosis for her hips or her blood pressure. Instead, I saw my own name at the top: Subject Thaddeus Collier, sample hair follicle and blood analysis. The date was from 3 days ago, the day I left for Chicago. I scanned the rows of chemical names meaningless to a layman until my eyes landed on the summary at the bottom, highlighted in yellow marker. High concentrations of digitalis and benzodiazepines detected consistent with long-term systematic poisoning. Symptoms may mimic dementia, confusion, memory loss, and heart failure. The lighter almost fell from my hand. The world tilted on its axis. For 6 months I had been living in a fog. I had been forgetting appointments, losing my keys, waking up confused, unable to remember what day it was. I thought it was age. I thought it was the inevitable decline that comes for all men. I thought I was losing my mind piece by piece, and Vanessa had been there every step of the way, holding my hand, looking at me with those sad, pitying eyes, telling the doctor, "Dad is just getting worse, isn't he?" It wasn't age, it was poison. They had been feeding it to me pill by pill, day by day. I remembered the heart medication Gavin had insisted on picking up from the pharmacy for me because the lines were too long. I remembered Vanessa sorting my pill organizer every Sunday morning, cheerfully telling me she wanted to help. I wasn't going senile. I was being murdered slowly, carefully, so that when I finally dropped dead, nobody would ask questions. They were erasing me while I was still alive. I dropped the report and picked up the letter. My hands were trembling so hard the paper rattled. Beatrice's words swam before my eyes, illuminated by the dying flame of the lighter. "My dearest Thaddeus, if you are reading..." Then I ran out of time. I found the pills in Gavin's coat pocket yesterday. They aren't your heart medicine, Thaddeus. They are something else. I sent a sample to the lab and the results came back this morning. You are not sick, my love. You are being poisoned. I confronted Vanessa an hour ago. I showed her the report, expecting her to be horrified, expecting her to call the police, but she didn't cry. "Thaddeus." She laughed. She told me that I was ruining everything. She told me that Gavin needed the money to pay off the loan sharks and that your life insurance was their only way out. She knew Thaddeus. She has known for months. She watched you get sick and she let it happen. She chose him over us. I am going to the police station now, but Gavin is blocking the driveway. He is looking at me through the window and he has a baseball bat. I am going to try to run through the backyard to the neighbors, hide this in the shed on my way out. I love you. Save yourself. Don let them take everything we built, your B. Sound tore out of my throat, a raw animal noise that had nothing to do with physical pain. Tears, hot and burning, streamed down my frozen cheeks, dropping onto the letter, smearing the ink of her last words. She knew. Vanessa knew. That was the knife that cut deepest, deeper than the poison, deeper than the cold. My own daughter, the girl I had taught to ride a bike, the girl I had walked down the aisle. She had watched me stumble and forget my own name, and she had smiled, calling it dementia. She had watched her husband mix poison into my morning coffee, and she had probably poured the cup herself. The betrayal was so absolute, so complete, that it felt like my chest was caving in. I sat there, in the dark shed, surrounded by the smell of gasoline and lavender, weeping for the wife who had died trying to save me, and weeping for the daughter who was already dead to me. My grief turned into something else as I sat there. It hardened. It crystallized like ice forming on a lake. It stopped being sadness and started being fuel. I wiped my eyes with the back of my dirty glove, smearing soot and tears across my face. I folded the letter carefully and put it in my inner pocket next to my heart. I picked up the toxicology report and put it with the letter. This was not just paper. This was my vindication. This was the difference between a tragic accident and a life sentence. Outside, the banging on the door intensified. I heard the screech of metal. Gavin was using a crowbar trying to pry the hinges off. "Open up, Thaddeus!" he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "We know you are in there. It is over. Giving up makes it easier. Easier." I looked at the chainsaw on the floor. I looked at the red jerry can of gasoline. I looked at the heavy axe leaning against the wall. Beatrice was right. I had built a foundation of concrete and steel, but I had allowed rot to fester in the framing. I had been blind, but I wasn't blind anymore. The fog in my brain, the confusion, the weakness, it all made sense now, and knowing gave me a surge of clarity I hadn't felt in months. I stood up, ignoring the screaming agony in my shoulder. I was not a sick old man. I was Thaddeus Iron Collier, and I had one last job to do. I was going to just survive this night. I was going to level the playing field. I was going to take their greed, their lies, and their violence, and I was going to bury them with it. I picked up the jerry can and unscrewed the cap. The sharp fumes filled the small space, clearing my head, chasing away the scent of lavender. I poured a small amount onto a rag, creating a makeshift torch. Then I picked up the chainsaw, checking the choke. They wanted to come in. They wanted to finish the job. Let them come. I was done building. Now it was time to tear everything down. The silence in the shed was heavy, broken only by the sloshing of gasoline as I finished soaking the rag wrapped around the head of the splitting maul. I had created a crude torch, a medieval weapon for a barbaric night. My shoulder was throbbing with a pulse of its own, a deep bone-grinding rhythm that tried to cloud my judgment with pain. But I pushed it aside. Pain is just a signal telling you something is wrong. I already knew everything was wrong. I did not need the reminder. I pressed my ear against the rough wood of the door, straining to hear what was happening outside. The wind had died down slightly, leaving an eerie quiet in the wake of the storm. I heard footsteps crunching away from the shed, heavy and confident. It was Gavin. He was walking back toward the driveway, leaving me to rot in the freezing dark. He thought the cold would do his dirty work for him. He thought he had all the time in the world. He forgot that time is a construct, and tonight I was the one watching the clock. He was going for Chloe. The thought sent a spike of adrenaline through my veins that temporarily numbed the agony in my arm. Chloe was locked in my truck, sitting in the passenger seat surrounded by 2 tons of American steel, but she was 8 years old. He was terrified, and she was facing her father, the man who was supposed to be her protector. I closed my eyes, picturing the inside of my cab I had taught Chloe about that truck. She loved the buttons, the lights, the way the engine purred. She had a mind that latched onto details, patterns, and systems. Doctors called it autism. Vanessa called it a burden. I called it brilliance. Chloe knew that when you get in a vehicle, you lock the door. It was part of the sequence I had taught her. Seatbelt lock, check mirrors. She never missed a step. I heard Gavin shouting something muffled by the distance and the wind. "Come out of there, Chloe." "Open the door. Daddy needs to move the truck." Silence. I held my breath inside the shed. My hand gripped the handle of the chainsaw tighter. The yellow plastic of the steel casing was cold and greasy under my palm. I was waiting for the sound of the door opening, waiting for the surrender, but it did not come. Instead, I heard the handle of the truck door being yanked up and snapping back down, locked again, yank, snap, locked. My heart swelled with a fierce pride inside my chest. "Good girl, Chloe. Good girl. Keep him out. Open this door right now." Gavin. Voice was louder now, edging toward hysteria. He was losing control. He had expected compliance. He had expected a scared little girl who would do what she was told. But Chloe did not process fear the way other children did. When she was overwhelmed, she did not panic. She shut down and she followed the rules. The rule was, lock the door. Do not open it for anyone but Grandpa. And then the night was ripped apart. Honk! The sound was deafening, piercing the stillness of the snowy suburbs. It was a long, sustained blast of the horn, continuous and unwavering. Chloe had leaned over and put her entire weight on the center of the steering wheel. She wasn't just signaling, she was screaming in the only language that mattered right now. She was waking the world up. Honk! The sound echoed off the trees, bouncing back from the neighbors' houses. Half a mile away, it was a distress call. It was a challenge. It was the sound of my granddaughter fighting back. "Stop it!" Gavin screamed. I could hear him clearly now over the blare of the horn. "Stop that noise, you stupid little brat!" I heard a thud. The dull, heavy sound of a fist hitting metal. He was punching the window. Then another thud, harder this time. He was using the bat. The urgency in the shed shifted from tactical preparation to desperate action. I could not wait anymore. He was going to break that glass. The side windows of a '78 Ford are tough-tempered glass, but they are not invincible against an aluminum bat, swung by a desperate man facing a life sentence. I looked down at the chainsaw in my hand. It was an MS-271 Farm Boss, a tool I had used to clear oak trees from this property 20 years ago. It was heavy, loud, and dangerous. It was not designed for combat, but tonight it was the sword of justice. I checked the fuel bulb, pressing it 3 times, watching the gas fill the small, clear dome, priming the engine. The horn was still blaring, a constant drone of defiance. Honk, honk, honk. She was pulsing it now, creating a rhythm, an SOS. I heard the smash of glass. The sound was distinct, shattering the air, sharp and crystalline. The horn stopped abruptly. "Got you!" Gavin shouted. His voice was breathless, savage. "Drag her out. Get her out of there." That was it. The glass was broken. The sanctuary was breached. My granddaughter was exposed to the monster. I did not feel the cold anymore. I did not feel the age in my joints or the poison in my blood. I felt only a cold, white-hot clarity. I flipped the switch on the chainsaw to the start position. I placed my boot on the rear handle, anchoring it to the concrete floor. I gripped the starter cord with my good hand, my right hand, the hand that had signed paychecks for hundreds of men, the hand that had built skyscrapers and bridges. I pulled. The engine sputtered and died. The cold oil was thick. The machine was stiff from disuse. "Come on, come." I hissed, gritting my teeth. Sweat broke out on my forehead, instantly freezing in the frigid air. "Come on, you son of a bitch! Start outside!" I heard Chloe screaming. It was a high-pitched, terrified sound that tore through my heart like a serrated blade. "Let me go! Grandpa, help!" I pulled the cord again harder, throwing my entire body weight into the motion, ignoring the scream of protest from my injured shoulder. The engine caught for a second, and then died again. It was flooded, or it was too cold. I could smell the exhaust mixing with the gasoline fumes in the shed. "Please," I whispered, looking up at the wooden ceiling, looking past it to whatever God might be listening to a sinner like me. "Just this once. Give me this one thing." I heard the sound of feet scuffling in the snow. Gavin was dragging her. He was pulling her out of the truck, pulling her away from safety, dragging her toward the house, toward Vanessa, toward the end. I took a deep breath, centering myself. I channeled every ounce of strength I had left, every drop of rage, every memory of Beatrice lying under that tarp. I became the Iron. They named me after I pulled the cord. A third time. Roar! The chainsaw exploded to life. The sound was magnificent, a deafening mechanical scream that filled the small shed and vibrated through the floorboards. The engine revved high and angry, blowing blue smoke into the air. It was the sound of power. It was the sound of consequences. I kicked the wooden block away from the door. I grabbed the handle of the saw, revving the trigger, letting the chain spin, a blur of steel teeth moving at 60 feet per second. I wasn't trapped anymore. I stepped toward the door, raising the saw. The oak was thick, reinforced, solid, but it was wood, and I was holding the thing that eats wood. I jammed the bar of the chainsaw into the gap between the door and the frame, right where the deadbolt was fastened. Wood chips flew into the air like confetti, a storm of sawdust, blinding and sharp. The saw shrieked, biting into the timber, finding the metal of the bolt, sparking, throwing orange fire against the darkness. I pushed harder, leaning my weight into it, feeling the machine buck and fight in my hands. The door groaned. The metal shrieked, and then with a crack that sounded like a gunshot, the deadbolt gave way. I kicked the door open. The cold night air rushed in, feeding the engine, making it roar even louder. I stepped out into the snow, the chainsaw idling in my hand, smoke curling around me like a demon rising from the underworld. I saw them. Gavin was halfway to the house, dragging Chloe by the hood of her pink coat. She was flailing, kicking, digging her heels into the snow, trying to be heavy, trying to be difficult. Gavin stopped. He turned around, staring at me. His eyes went wide. The baseball bat dropped from his hand, landing softly in the snow. He saw me standing there, framed by the dark doorway of the shed, the chainsaw revving in my hand, the makeshift torch burning on the ground behind me, casting a long dancing shadow. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. I just squeezed the trigger and let the saw scream for me. The door to the shed was unlatched, the deadbolt hanging by a thread of twisted metal where I had cut it. Gavin was out there in the snow, gripping that baseball bat, waiting for the old bear to come stumbling out of the cave. He expected me to charge him. He expected a desperate frontal assault from a dying man. He was ready to swing that bat at my head the moment I stepped across the threshold. But Gavin made the same mistake everyone makes when they deal with Thaddeus Collier. He forgot that I am not a fighter, I am a builder, and a builder knows that every structure has a weak point, if you know where to look. I did not kick the door open. Instead, I took a step back, letting the chainsaw idle, its engine rumbling like an angry cat in my hands. I turned my back to the door and faced the rear wall of the shed. To anyone else, it was just a wall of rough pine planks covered in cobwebs and hanging tools. But to me, it was a blueprint. I remembered the summer of 1985, when I extended the basement of the main house. I remembered framing this specific section. I knew that behind those pine planks were 2 layers of insulation, a sheet of drywall, and the north corner of my finished basement. I knew the studs were spaced 16 inches on center. I knew exactly where the electrical wiring ran, because I had pulled the copper wire myself. I knew that if I cut a rectangle right here between the 3rd and 4th stud, I would not hit a pipe, and I would not hit a wire. I would hit open air. I revved the chainsaw, the noise deafening in the small space. Masking the sound of my movement from the man outside, I plunged the bar of the saw into the back wall. The chain bit into the wood, throwing a rooster tail of pine chips into the air. It sliced through the exterior planks like they were paper. Then it hit the insulation, shredding the pink fiberglass. Then the drywall I worked. Fast adrenaline overriding the screaming agony in my left shoulder. I cut a vertical line 3 feet long, then a horizontal one, then another vertical. I was carving a door where no door existed. Outside I heard Gavin yelling, confused by the noise. He was shouting at me to come out, thinking I was cutting the door down. He did not realize I was going the other way. I kicked the section of wall I had just cut. It resisted for a second, then snapped. The piece of drywall fell inward into the basement, crashing onto the carpeted floor inside. A blast of warm air rushed into the freezing shed, smelling of furnace heat and old books. I squeezed through the hole, dragging the chainsaw behind me. I tumbled onto the floor of my basement, landing on my good shoulder. I lay there for a second, gasping for breath, letting the warmth of the house seep into my frozen bones. I was in. I stood up, leaving the chainsaw on the floor. I did not need it anymore. Silence was my weapon now. I was in the finished section of the basement, the game room where I used to play pool with my friends before they all passed away. The room was dimly lit by the standby lights on the electronics. The house was humming, living, breathing around me. I knew exactly where I needed to go. I moved silently across the carpet, my heavy boots making no sound. I knew which floorboards creaked. I knew which doors squeaked. I had corrected them all over the years. I moved toward the utility room in the back corner, the nerve center of the house. I could hear footsteps on the floor above me. Vanessa. She was pacing in the kitchen directly overhead. Her heels clicked nervously on the tile. Clack, clack, clack. She was alone inside, waiting for Gavin to bring Chloe back, waiting for the nightmare to end so she could count her money. I reached the utility room and opened the gray metal panel of the breaker box. It was a 200-amp service panel, a tangled roadmap of the house's nervous system. Each switch was labeled in my own handwriting: kitchen, living, kitchen. Room, master bedroom, exterior, lights. My hand hovered over the switches. I could turn them off one by one, playing games with them, making them wonder, making them panic. But I did not have time for games. Chloe was in danger. I needed total, absolute chaos. I reached for the main throw, the heavy black lever at the top of the panel that controlled the feed from the street. I gripped it with my leather glove. "Let there be darkness," I whispered. I yanked the lever down. The chunk! The sound was heavy and final. Instantly, the hum of the refrigerator died. The furnace stopped its low rumble. The standby lights on the TV vanished. The house was plunged into a darkness so complete it felt physical, heavy, and suffocating. Upstairs, I heard the crash of something breaking glass or ceramic, followed immediately by a scream. It was Vanessa. "Dad," she shrieked. Her voice trembled with a primal fear, terrified of the sudden void. I stood in the dark and I smiled. It was a cold, hard smile. I knew something about my daughter that Gavin did not know. Vanessa had been afraid of the dark since she was a child. She used to sleep with 3 nightlights. When the power went out during storms, she would hyperventilate. She needed control, she needed visibility. Without it, she was just a frightened child again. I moved out of the utility room, navigating by memory. I did not need to see. I knew that the pool table was 3 steps to the left. I knew the stairs were 10 paces forward. I was a part of this house, and now the house was fighting for me. I reached the bottom of the stairs. I listened. Above me in the kitchen, Vanessa was panicking. "Gavin," she screamed. "Gavin, the lights. He cut the lights. Where are you?" I started to climb the stairs, 1 step at a time, slowly, deliberately. The darkness wrapped around me like a cloak, making me invisible, making me a ghost. Outside, I heard Gavin trying to force the front door. But the front door was solid oak, reinforced with a steel core and a biometric deadbolt that disengaged only with a key or a fingerprint when the power was out. He was locked out. He was separated from his partner. He was stuck in the cold while I was inside with the woman who had betrayed me. I reached the top of the stairs. The kitchen was a cavern of shadows. The only light came from the windows, pale gray moonlight filtering through the snowstorm, casting long skeletal shapes across the floor. I saw her. Vanessa was standing by the island, clutching the shotgun. She was spinning around, aiming at the shadows, breathing fast and shallow. She pulled her phone out, trying to turn on the flashlight, but her hands were shaking so bad she dropped it. It slid across the floor, spinning away under the cabinets. "Who is there?" she whimpered, spinning toward the hallway. "Dad, is that you?" I did not answer. I stayed in the shadows by the refrigerator, watching her disintegrate. Fear is a powerful solvent. It dissolves confidence. It dissolves arrogance until all that is left is the shivering truth. She fired a shot blindly. Into the living room. Boom! The flash lit up the room for a split second, revealing her face twisted in terror. The buckshot tore into my favorite leather armchair, sending stuffing into the air. "Stop wasting ammo, Vanessa," I said. My voice was low calm, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You are going to need it." She spun toward my voice, pumping the shotgun, trying to chamber another round, but in her panic, she short-shucked it. The shell jammed. The gun was useless. "Dad, please," she sobbed, backing away until she hit the counter. "Please stop. You are scaring me." "You should be scared," I said, stepping out of the shadows just enough for the moonlight to catch the side of my face. "I built this house, Vanessa. I built the walls. I built the roof. And tonight, I am taking it back." She threw the jammed shotgun at me and turned to run, scrambling toward the back door, toward Gavin, toward escape. But I knew the layout. The kitchen island was between her and the door. She tried to go around it, but she slipped on the floor where she had dropped a vase in the dark. I moved toward her, not running, just walking, a steady, inevitable advance. She was my daughter, my flesh and blood. But looking at her cowering there, I felt nothing but a cold resolve. She had made her choice. She had chosen the poison. She had chosen the shovel. Now she had to choose the consequences. I picked up a heavy cast iron skillet from the pot rack. It wasn't a weapon of war, but in the hands of an angry father it would do. Gavin was pounding on the back door now, shouting her name, throwing his body against the glass. The glass was double-paned, tempered safety glass. It would hold for a few more seconds. I looked down at Vanessa. She was curled up on the floor, weeping, shielding her head. "Open the door," she screamed to Gavin. "Open it!" I leaned down close to her ear, my voice a whisper that cut through her sobbing. "He cannot. Open it, Vanessa," I said. I changed the locks last week, knowing deep down that something was wrong, knowing that wolves were wolves. Circling, I stood up and looked at the back door where Gavin was frantically trying to smash the glass with a patio chair. I gripped the cast iron skillet. "Let him in," I said to the darkness. "Let him come in to the house of pain." I left Vanessa shivering on the kitchen floor, curled into a ball of silk and regret. She was no longer a threat. She was broken by the darkness and the realization that her father was not the helpless old man she thought she had buried. I did not tie her up. I did not have to. Fear is a stronger bind than any rope. I had to move fast. My shoulder was screaming a constant high-pitched agony that made my vision blur at the edges, but I pushed it down deep into the boiler room of my gut, burning it as fuel. I needed to get Gavin away from the truck. He was still out there in the snow, pounding on the glass of my Ford, trying to get to Chloe. He was desperate and desperate. Men do terrible things. He would break that window eventually, or he would realize he could just shoot the lockout with the pistol I knew he carried in his glove box. I had to separate him from my granddaughter, but I could not go out there and fight him. Not like this. Not with one good arm and a heart that was fluttering like a trapped bird. I retreated down the hallway, moving through the blackness of the house I knew so well. My hand trailed along the wall, counting the door frames until I reached the master study. It was my sanctuary, the place where I reviewed blueprints and drank scotch. It was also where I kept the emergency prep kit. I fumbled in the dark until my fingers found the heavy metal box under the desk. I dragged it out. Popping the latches inside was a battery-operated shortwave radio, a heavy-duty flashlight, and a first aid kit. I ignored the bandages. I grabbed the radio. It was an old Midland emergency transceiver capable of picking up weather bands and police frequencies. I turned it on, keeping the volume low. The static hissed in the silence of the room, a white noise that sounded like the storm outside. I reached for the landline phone on the desk, hoping against hope that I could just dial 911 and let the professionals handle this. I lifted the receiver. Silence. No dial tone. No hum. Just the dead weight of plastic. Gavin or Vanessa had cut the line outside. It was smart. It was thorough, but it was not enough. I looked at the radio in my hand, and then up at the wall where the panel for the house intercom system glowed faintly with a green LED light. The intercom, the new tone system I had installed in 1998. It was a hardwired system connecting every room in the house, and more importantly, it had external speakers on the front porch and the back patio. It ran on a separate backup battery loop independent of the main breaker I had cut. A plan formed in my mind, jagged and risky. But it was all I had. I grabbed a pair of wire strippers from my desk drawer. I pulled the intercom faceplate off the wall, popping the plastic clips I didn't need to see the wires I knew. Them. Red for power, black for ground, yellow for audio signal. I turned the volume on the shortwave radio all the way up, turning the tuning dial until I found a channel that was nothing but static and garbled interference. It sounded aggressive, chaotic. It sounded like a police scanner on a bad night. I stripped the yellow audio wire from the intercom and twisted it around the headphone jack of the radio. It was a crude connection, a jerry-rigged splice that would make any electrician cringe. But as the static suddenly blasted through the speakers in the study, I knew it worked. Now I had to be the actor. I pressed the all-call button on the intercom panel. This would broadcast whatever I said to every speaker in the house and every speaker outside, blasting it into the snowy night. I took a deep breath, closing my eyes, visualizing the police dramas I used to watch with Beatrice, visualizing the real cops I had seen on job sites controlling crowds. I lowered my voice, making it gravelly, stripping away the emotion, leaving only cold, hard authority. I keyed the microphone. This is dispatch to Unit 4 Alpha. We have a 10:33 in progress at the Collier residence. Neighbors report shots fired. Suspects considered armed and dangerous. I let go of the button, letting the static from the radio fill the silence for a few seconds, mimicking the squelch of a police channel. Then I keyed it again, pitching my voice slightly higher, changing the cadence, pretending to be a responding officer. Copy that, dispatch. We are approaching the perimeter now. I see a suspect in the backyard by the vehicle. Unit 2, take the east gate. Unit 3, block the driveway. Do not let them exit. I press the button for the external speakers, only channeling the sound directly to the backyard, directly to Gavin. This is the Adena Police Department. I boomed into the mic, my voice amplified and distorted by the cold speakers echoing off the trees. Step away from the vehicle. Drop your weapon and put your hands in the air. We have you surrounded. I held my breath. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would trigger the intercom microphone. I moved to the window, peering through the slats of the blinds, looking out into the yard. The floodlights were off because I had cut the power, but the moonlight reflecting off the snow provided a ghostly illumination. I saw Gavin. He had stopped pounding on the truck. He was standing rigid, looking toward the front gate, looking toward the imaginary sirens. For a second he hesitated. He looked at the truck where his daughter was trapped. Then he looked at the dark woods surrounding the property. Panic is a contagion, and I had just injected him with a lethal dose. He didn't check the gate. He didn't call my bluff. He did exactly what a coward does when he thinks the law has arrived. He ran. He dropped the crowbar he had been using on the window. He turned and sprinted, not toward the woods, but toward the house, toward the back door, toward Vanessa. He thought he could get inside, grab his wife, grab the car keys to the SUV, and maybe slip out through the garage before the imaginary perimeter closed in. Or maybe he just wanted to hide. He hit the back door handle, scrambling to get in, but it was locked. He banged on the glass, screaming for Vanessa, his voice lost in the wind. Let me in. Ness. They are here. The cops are here. Let me in. I watched him struggle, a pathetic figure in an expensive coat, terrified of a ghost army. I had conjured with a battery and a piece of wire. But the most important thing was the truck. It sat there silent and dark in the driveway. The glass was cracked, but it hadn't shattered. Chloe was still inside, terrified, but safe. The wolf had been chased away from the door. I slumped back against the desk, the adrenaline crashing, leaving me shaking. My shoulder throbbed, a reminder that this was far from over. I had bought time, maybe 2 minutes, maybe 5. Gavin would realize soon enough that there were no sirens, that no blue lights were flashing in the driveway. He would realize the house was dark and silent, and that the only police force here was a 72-year-old man with a head full of bad wiring and a heart full of vengeance. But now the dynamic had changed. They were both inside now, or trying to get in. Gavin would find a way. He would break a window or kick in a door. And when he did, he would be in my world. I disconnected the radio from the intercom, pushing the wires back into the wall. I didn't need the ruse anymore. I picked up the heavy flashlight, testing its weight. It was a maglite, solid aluminum, capable of cracking a skull just as easily as lighting a path. I had separated them. I had confused them. Now I had to finish them. I heard the sound of glass breaking at the back of the house. Gavin had smashed the patio door. He was in. I listened. The house was a labyrinth of shadows, and I was the Minotaur. I heard them meeting in the kitchen, heard their frantic whispers. "Where are they?" Gavin was hissing. "Where are the cops I don't see?" I done. "Lights!" I heard a voice on the radio. Vanessa sobbed. "He said they were at the gate. He said they had us surrounded." "We have to go," Gavin said. "We have to get the keys and go. We take your car. The SUV is blocked. Leave the brat." "We run. Leave the brat." The words floated down the hallway, carried by the cold draft from the broken door. They seared into my brain, branding my soul. He was willing to leave his own daughter to freeze to death in a locked truck while he saved his own skin. I stood up in the darkness of the study, gripping the flashlight in my left hand and the heavy cast-iron skillet in my right. I wasn't feeling pain anymore. I wasn't feeling fatigue. I was feeling a cold, surgical precision. I stepped out into the hallway, moving toward the voices. "You are not going anywhere," I whispered to the darkness. I moved silently, my boots finding the silent spots on the floorboards I was hunting now. And the prey had just walked into the trap. I knew exactly where they would go. They would go upstairs to the master bedroom to find the safe, to get the cash and the passports they thought were there. They would come right past me. I pressed myself into the alcove under the stairs, blending into the shadows, becoming part of the architecture. I waited. I controlled my breathing, slowing my heart rate down, forcing the poison in my blood to wait, forcing the death hovering over my shoulder to take a step back. "Not yet," I told the Reaper. "Not until I am done." I heard their footsteps on the hardwood floor coming closer, hurried, chaotic. They were arguing, blaming each other, their voices rising in panic. "It was the old man," Gavin said. "He did this. He set us up. Where is he?" "He is hiding," Vanessa whispered. "He is hurt. He cannot be far." They were right. I wasn't far. I was right here, waiting in the dark. They feared so much, ready to show them that the scariest thing in this house wasn't the police, and it wasn't the cold. It was the father they had betrayed. The house was silent again, save for the heavy breathing of the man hunting me. Gavin was moving down the hallway now. He had abandoned the caution of a thief and embraced the aggression of a cornered animal. He was not looking for police anymore. He was looking for me. He knew I was inside, and he knew I was hurt. He probably thought I was cowering in a closet somewhere waiting to die. He was wrong. I was not cowering. I was waiting in the alcove under the main staircase, the darkest shadow in the entire house. It was a tight space where I used to store the vacuum cleaner. But tonight, it was a sniper nest. My hand was not empty. On my way from the kitchen through the mudroom, I had grabbed my old leather tool belt hanging on the peg. It was heavy, stiff with age, but the tools inside were familiar extensions of my own body. A hammer, a screwdriver, and a pair of heavy-duty lineman pliers. I heard Gavin's footsteps stop right in front of the alcove. He was so close I could smell his expensive cologne mixing with the scent of fear, sweat. He was breathing hard, scanning the living room, holding a heavy brass candlestick he must have grabbed from the foyer table. He turned his back to me, looking toward the dining room. Now I did not step out. I lunged. I threw my entire body weight, 72 years of heavy bone and muscle, into his lower back, tackling him just above the hips. It was not a graceful move. It was a tackle I learned playing high school football in 1968, low and hard driving through the target. We hit the floor with a bone-jarring thud. The candlestick skittered away across the hardwood. Gavin grunted. The wind knocked out of him, but he was young and he was strong. He rolled instantly, thrashing like a caught shark. His elbow slammed into my face, busting my lip, filling my mouth with the copper taste of blood. "Get off me, you old lunatic," he screamed, bucking his hips, throwing me sideways. I tried to pin him, but my bad shoulder gave way, exploding in a fresh wave of agony that made my vision swim. Gavin scrambled on top of me, his hands going for my throat. He was heavy, solid muscle fed by gym memberships and protein shakes. I was just old iron rusting at the seams. "Die!" He gritted out his thumbs, pressing into my windpipe, squeezing the air from my lungs. "Die already." I stared up into his face, twisted with hate and panic. The edges of my vision started to turn black. My lungs burned, but my mind was clear. He was strangling me. He was focused entirely on my neck. He had forgotten about my hands. I reached down to my waist, my fingers fumbling blindly in the pouches of the tool belt. I found it. The cold rubber handles of the lineman pliers. I didn't aim for his head. I didn't aim for his chest. I aimed for the hand that was killing me. I swung the pliers upward, hooking the open jaws around his right thumb, the thumb that was crushing my windpipe, and I squeezed with every ounce of grip strength I had left from 50 years of laying brick. Crunch! Gavin screamed, a high-pitched shriek that tore through the house. He let go of my throat, rolling off. Me clutching his hand, I didn't stop. I didn't give him space to recover. I scrambled on top of him, ignoring the pain in my shoulder, ignoring the dizziness. I grabbed his right hand again, pinning it to the floorboards with my knee. He punched me in the ribs with his left hand, but I barely felt it. Adrenaline is a powerful anesthetic. I had his right hand trapped, looking at it in the dim moonlight filtering through the window. "You like guns, Gavin," I rasped, spitting blood onto his white shirt. "You like pulling triggers." I clamped the heavy jaws of the pliers onto his index finger, the trigger finger. "Please," he begged, his eyes wide with terror. "Please, Thaddeus Don, you cannot shoot my granddaughter without a finger," I said, my voice devoid of mercy. I twisted the pliers using the leverage of the long handles, applying torque until I felt the joint give way, until I felt the bone snap. Gavin howled, arching his back in agony, kicking his legs wildly, but the fight had gone out of him. He wasn't a warrior, he was a bully. And bullies crumble when they feel real pain. I raised the pliers again, ready to finish it, ready to break every finger on his hand if I had to, ready to make sure he could never hurt anyone ever again. I was going to dismantle him piece by piece, just like I would dismantle a faulty engine. "Stop it, or I will burn us all to hell," the voice came from the top of the stairs. It was sharp, hysterical, and deadly serious. I froze, the pliers hovering inches above Gavin. Broken hand. I looked up. Vanessa was standing on the landing, looking down at us. In one hand, she held the red jerry can I had left in the kitchen. In the other hand, she held a silver Zippo lighter, the flame already lit, dancing in the darkness. She was soaked in gasoline. The front of her silk blouse was dark and wet, crying tears of fuel. She had poured it on herself, or maybe she had slipped, but the smell was overpowering, fumes rising up the stairs, turning the air into a bomb. "Dad, get away from him," she screamed, her voice cracking. "Step away or I drop this lighter. I swear to God I will do it." I looked at her, at my daughter standing there bathed in moonlight and madness. She wasn't bluffing. I could see it in her eyes, the frantic dilatation of a creature that has run out of options. She knew she was going to prison. She knew the money was gone. She had decided that if she could have the house, no one would. "Vanessa, put the lighter down," I said, slowly climbing off Gavin, keeping my hands visible. I stood up, swaying slightly, my chest heaving. "Do not do this. I have nothing left," she sobbed, the lighter shaking in her hand, creating flickering shadows on the wall. "You took it all. You and your precious morals. You judge me. You always judged me. You think you are so perfect, so strong. Well, look at you now, begging me not to burn down your legacy. It is not about the house, Vanessa," I said, taking a cautious step toward the stairs. "It is about you. You are covered in gas. If you drop that, you die. Do you understand? You will burn." "I do not care," she shrieked, backing up toward the bedroom door. "I do not care anymore. Better to burn than to rot in a cell like an animal. I am not going to let you win, Dad. I am not going to let you see me in handcuffs." Behind me, Gavin was moaning, cradling his mangled hand, trying to crawl away. He didn't care about his wife. He didn't care about the house. He just wanted to get away from the pliers. I looked back at Vanessa. She was tilting the can, pouring more gasoline onto the carpet at her feet. The fumes were so thick I could taste them. One spark, just one slip of her thumb, and this entire house would go up like a Roman candle. And Chloe was still outside in the truck just 20 feet from the house. If the house exploded, the heat alone could kill her. I realized then that I couldn't fight her. I couldn't tackle her. I couldn't use the pliers on her. She was holding a nuclear trigger. "Okay, Vanessa," I said, raising my hands, surrendering for real this time. "Okay, you win. What do you want?" "I want you to sit down," she commanded, waving the lighter recklessly. "Sit down on the stairs right there where I can see you, and tell your friend outside to unlock the gate. We are leaving. We are taking the truck, and we are taking Chloe." "No," I said, instinct taking over. "Not Chloe. Take the truck. Take my wallet. Take anything." "But the girl stays." "Then we burn," she whispered, and her thumb moved on the lighter wheel. The flame grew larger, My heart stopped. She meant it. She was insane with grief and greed, and she was going to kill us all. I looked at the lighter, the small yellow flame that held the power of the sun. I looked at Gavin crawling like a worm. I looked at the walls. I had built the home I had made. I sat down heavily on the second step, the fight draining out of me. Not because I was beaten, but because I was terrified for my granddaughter. "Fine," I said, my voice hollow. "Fine. Take the truck. Just put the lighter out." Vanessa smiled. It was a triumphant, broken smile. She thought she had checkmated the king, but she forgot that. Even when a king surrenders, the game is not over until the pieces are off the board. "Gavin, get up," she yelled at her husband. "Get the keys from his pocket. We are leaving." Gavin struggled to his knees, clutching his broken hand, his face pale and sweating. He looked at me with pure hatred, but he was too afraid to come close. He skirted around the banister, keeping his distance, moving toward the stairs where I sat. I watched him come. I watched the lighter in Vanessa's hand, and I prayed for a miracle. I prayed for the wind. I prayed for anything, because I knew the moment they walked out that door with Chloe, I would never see my granddaughter again. But miracles don't always come from heaven. Sometimes they come from the mistakes of your enemies. Vanessa took a step forward to welcome Gavin, and her heel caught on the edge of the carpet where she had poured the gasoline. She stumbled. The lighter flew from her hand. Time seemed to slow down. I watched the silver Zippo flip through the air end over end, the small flame still burning, a tiny star falling toward the gasoline-soaked carpet. "No!" I shouted, lunging forward, not at Gavin, not at Vanessa, but at the flame. But I was too slow. The lighter hit the floor. Whoosh! The sound was like a jet engine igniting. The hallway upstairs didn't just catch fire. It exploded. A wall of blue and orange flame erupted instantly, separating Vanessa from me, separating the upstairs from the downstairs. The heat was instantaneous, searing my eyebrows. Vanessa screamed, disappearing behind a curtain of fire. I fell back down the stairs, shielding my face. The house, my masterpiece, was burning, and the war had just turned into a rescue mission. The wall of fire was a living, breathing monster separating me from the daughter I had raised. It roared with a hunger that terrified me, eating the oxygen in the hallway, turning the antique wallpaper into ash. But even over the roar of the flames, I could hear her screaming. It was not a scream of pain. It was a scream of pure, unadulterated hatred that burned hotter than the gasoline. "You never loved me, Dad." Her voice tore through the smoke, ragged and distorted. "You never looked at me the way you looked at your blueprints. You never touched me with the same care you used to lay those damn bricks. It was always the company. It was always the legacy. And then it was her." I coughed, shielding my face with my arm, trying to see through the orange haze. Vanessa was standing on the landing just beyond the reach of the flames, silhouetted like a demon. She wasn't running. She wasn't trying to escape. She was standing there, pouring out 40 years of poison. "Do not talk about her," I shouted back, my voice raw. "She loved you, Vanessa. She treated you like her own flesh and blood. She was not my mother." Vanessa shrieked, and the venom in her voice made me flinch. "She was just the help you decided to marry. She was the replacement you brought in because you couldn't handle raising me alone. You forced me to call her mom. You forced me to respect her. But she was just a barrier, Dad. A barrier between me and what was rightfully mine." The words hit me like physical blows, staggering me more than the heat. Beatrice was the woman who had sat up with Vanessa when she had chickenpox. Beatrice was the one who went to every parent-teacher conference because I was working double shifts to build the business. Beatrice was the one who defended Vanessa when she got expelled from boarding school. And this was how she was repaid, with a shovel and a lie. "You are ungrateful," I whispered to the smoke, realizing with a sickening jolt that the daughter I thought I knew was a fiction. She had been wearing a mask for decades, waiting for the right moment to take it off. Gavin was still on the floor at my feet, cradling his shattered hand, whimpering like a wounded dog. I reached down and grabbed him by the lapels of his expensive coat, hauling him up, pushing him against the wall away from the heat of the stairs. "Tell me," I snarled into his face, ignoring the pain in my shoulder. "Tell me why you did it. Tell me why you killed the only woman who ever defended you against me." Gavin looked at me, his eyes wide and wet with tears of pain and terror. He looked at the fire, then back at me. He knew it was over. He knew the lies wouldn't work anymore. "We owe money, Thaddeus," he sobbed, snot running down his nose. "We owe so much money." "How much?" "$5 million, Gavin choked out. The number hung in the air, heavy and impossible. $5 million. I stared at him stunned. I knew Gavin was a mediocre businessman, but $5 million. How do you lose $5 million without buying a building or a jet? "Gambling," I asked, shaking him. "Crypto," he whispered, closing his eyes. "Crypto and leverage. We thought it was a sure thing. We bet everything. We leveraged the house. We leveraged Vanessa, trust fund. We borrowed from people. You do not say no to. Thaddeus. They gave us a deadline. 3 days. We had 3 days to come up with the money, or they were going to kill us. I let go of him. Letting him slide down the wall, I felt sick, not from the smoke, but from the sheer stupidity of it all. They had murdered Beatrice because of a digital gambling addiction. They had buried my wife in the frozen ground because they played with money they didn't have on things. They didn't understand. "You killed her for nothing," I said, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. "You killed a human being for $5 million of debt. You destroyed this family because you were greedy and stupid." "We needed the insurance," Gavin cried out, trying to justify the unjustifiable. "We needed your life insurance policy. The double indemnity clause for accidental death and Beatrice inheritance. Vanessa said it was the only way. She said you were old anyway. She said you had lived long enough." I looked up at the landing through the flames. Vanessa was gone, forced back by the heat, retreating into the master bedroom. But her words and Gavin's confession hung in the air, suffocating me. She said, "I had lived long enough." In that moment, something inside me broke. It wasn't my heart. My heart had broken hours ago when I saw Chloe in that hole. This was something else. This was the last thread of attachment, the final biological wire that connected me to Vanessa. It snapped. I realized with a cold, crystal clarity that I was no longer a father, dealing with a troubled child. I was a man dealing with a predator. The little girl in pigtails who used to ask for ice cream was dead. She had died a long time ago, replaced by this stranger who viewed my death as a financial transaction, who viewed my wife as collateral damage. I looked at Gavin, huddled on the floor, clutching his hand. He was pathetic, weak, a follower. But Vanessa, she was the architect. She was the one who planned it. She was the one who poured the poison. She was the one who lit the fire. "I am not your father anymore," I whispered to the burning house. "I am just the executioner." I turned to Gavin, gripping the cast iron skillet again. My eyes were dry. The tears had evaporated in the heat. "Get up," I ordered him. "Get up and move toward the kitchen." He scrambled up, terrified of the skillet, terrified of the fire, terrified of me. "Where are we going?" "We are going to the basement," I said, shoving him forward. "You are going to help me turn the water back on." The fire was spreading fast, licking at the ceiling, turning the drywall black. I knew the structure of this house. I knew I had maybe 10 minutes before the main support beams were compromised, but I wasn't going to let it burn down. Not yet. I had built this house to last, and I was going to let them destroy it that easily. But more importantly, I needed to trap Vanessa. She had retreated to the master bedroom. The windows there were reinforced security glass, impossible to break without a tool. She was trapped upstairs. I shoved Gavin through the darkness toward the basement door. I didn't care about saving him. I didn't care about his debt. But I needed him for one last thing. Beatrice had raised a monster, and I had been too busy working to notice the scales growing over her skin. But tonight I saw her clearly for the first time. And as I descended into the dark basement, pushing her accomplice ahead of me, I made a promise to the ghost of my wife. I would not let the monster win. I would not let her take the money. I would not let her take the house, and I would certainly not let her take my granddaughter. The time for mercy was over. It was time for a correction. The fire was a living thing now, breathing heavy and hot against the ceiling of the first floor. The smoke was curling down the basement stairs like black fingers searching for us. But down here in the cool, damp concrete of the utility room, the air was still breathable. I shoved Gavin onto a pile of laundry bags. He didn't fight me. He was broken, clutching his mangled hand, rocking back and forth, murmuring to himself like a child. I looked up at the ceiling, listening to the frantic footsteps of my daughter above us. She was trapped on the second floor, cut off from the stairs by the wall of flames she had ignited. Her coughing was jagged and wet, echoing through the ventilation ducts. She was running out of air, and she was running out of time. "Dad," she screamed, her voice muffled by the floorboards. "Dad, help me. It is hot. It is so hot." I stood there in the dark, leaning against the water heater, trying to catch my breath. My shoulder felt like it was filled with broken glass, every heartbeat sending a fresh wave of nausea through my body, but I couldn't collapse. Not yet. I had one last structure to build, one last trap to spring. Vanessa was going to die up there if she stayed in the hallway. The fire would consume the oxygen and she would suffocate long before the flames touched her. Part of me, the part that had held her when she was a baby, wanted to rush up there and throw a blanket over her. But the other part, the part that had seen Beatrice lying under that blue tarp, knew that justice had to be served, and justice isn't about revenge. It is about containment. I needed to get her into the panic room. When I built this house 20 years ago, I designed the master study not just as an office, but as a fortress. It had reinforced walls, a separate ventilation system, and a heavy steel fire door hidden behind wood paneling. It was designed to keep people out, but like any good engineer, knows a door that locks from the inside can also be locked from the outside, if you know the code. I dragged myself to the bottom of the stairs, cupping my hands around my mouth, yelling up into the smoke-filled abyss. "Vanessa, listen to me. Go to the study. Go to the office. The door is fire-rated. It is the only safe place left." I heard her scrambling footsteps stumbling toward the master suite. She was desperate, looking for any sanctuary I am in, she choked out, coughing violently. "The smoke is coming under the door." "What do I do, Dad? What do I do?" I closed my eyes, leaning my forehead against the cool concrete wall. This was it, the final lie, the lie would save her life, but cost her freedom. "The safe," I shouted, my voice booming up the stairwell. "The money is in the safe, Vanessa. All of it, the cash, the bonds, the diamonds I took from the deposit box. It is all in the wall safe, behind the painting. Open it. Take it. It is yours. Just stay in the room." The sobbing above stopped instantly. It was terrifying how quickly the promise of wealth could override the fear of death. The coughing subsided, replaced by a sudden sharp focus. "What is the code?" she yelled back. Her voice was clearer now, eager. "The code. Dad. Give me the code." I hesitated. The code wasn't a number. It was a memory, and giving it to her felt like betraying that memory one last time. But I had to do it. I had to get her to touch that keypad. "It is your mother's birthday," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "Not Beatrice, your real mother. Her birthday. Month, day, year." There was a silence above. A heavy, pregnant silence followed by the sound of a painting being ripped off the wall and thrown to the floor. I pictured the safe in my mind. It was a Titan Defender, a custom model I had installed myself. It looked like a standard digital safe, but it was wired into the house's central security grid, giving it capabilities that most residential units never have. It had a battery backup that could last for weeks, and it had a duress protocol. If you entered the standard code, the safe opened. But if you entered the secondary code, the code I had just given her, the safe didn't open. It went into lockdown. I heard the beeps of the keypad filtering down through the floor, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I held my breath, standing in the darkness of the basement, waiting for the mechanism to engage. Up in the study, Vanessa was punching in the numbers of the woman who gave birth to her, the woman whose memory she had dishonored by turning into a monster. She probably thought she was seconds away from millions of dollars. She probably thought she had won. She probably thought the old man had finally broken beep, 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 long beep. That was the sound not of a safe opening, but of a system engaging. Suddenly, a loud mechanical clank echoed through the house, vibrating down the steel beams. It sounded like a prison door slamming shut. "What is that?" Vanessa screamed. Her voice was suddenly filled with a new kind of terror, panic rising an octave. The safe did not open. Dad. What happened? The door. The office door. It is moving. I knew exactly what was happening. The lockdown protocol had triggered the magnetic releases on the fire door, the hidden steel shutter designed to seal the room off in case of a biological or chemical attack was sliding out of the wall, slamming across the entrance. It was just a door. It was a 2-inch thick slab of solid steel, airtight and impenetrable. "No," she shrieked, pounding on the metal. "No, open it. Open it." She was trapped. She was safe from the fire. Yes. The study had its own air supply, but she was also sealed inside a steel box with no handle on the inside. And then the second part of the protocol kicked in. In the silence of the basement, my pocket started to vibrate. I pulled out my phone, examining the screen. It was a notification from the private security firm I contracted with, the ones who monitored the silent alarms. Silent duress alarm, activated Master Study Zone 4 police dispatch. Notified immediate response. I hadn't called 911 because the lines were cut, but the safe used a cellular uplink buried deep in the wall protected by lead shielding. It sent a signal that no wire cutter could stop. And because it was a duress alarm, the police weren't coming to check on a noise complaint. They were coming for a hostage situation. I looked at Gavin. He was staring at me, his face gray with shock. He heard the metal door slam upstairs. He heard his wife screaming, muffled now by layers of steel and insulation. "What did you do?" he whispered, horror dawning in his eyes. "What did you do to her?" I walked over to him, looming over his cowering form in the darkness. I gave her exactly what she wanted, Gavin, I said, my voice flat and cold. She wanted the inheritance. She wanted to be safe and secure. She wanted to be untouchable. Well, now she is. She is locked in a room with the family fortune, and she cannot spend a dime of it. Vanessa was still pounding on the door upstairs, a rhythmic, dull thumping that sounded like a heartbeat failing. She was screaming for me, begging me to open it, promising she would change, promising she would be good, but I knew better. You cannot fix a foundation that is rotten to the core. You can only condemn the building. I sat down on the bottom step of the basement stairs, listening to the roar of the fire above and the screams of my daughter fading into exhaustion. The heat was getting intense down here. The smoke was starting to layer near the ceiling. We had to move soon. We had to get out before the floor collapsed. But for a moment, I just sat there, gripping my aching shoulder, letting the tears finally fall in the darkness. I cried for the little girl who used to sit on my knee. I cried for the woman she could have been. I cried for the wife I had lost. And I cried because I knew that the man who walked out of this basement tonight would never be the same. Thaddeus the builder was dead. Thaddeus the survivor had just been born. I stood up, wiping my face with a soot-stained glove. I grabbed Gavin by the collar of his coat, hauling him to his feet. "Come on," I said roughly, dragging him toward the basement walkout door, the back exit, the one leading to the yard. "Where are we going?" he stammered, stumbling after me. "We are going to wait for the police," I said, pushing him toward the cold night air. "And while we wait, you are going to tell me everything about this debt, every name, every number, every dirty secret, because if you leave anything out, I will throw you back inside." I kicked the basement door open. The cold air hit us like a physical blow, cleansing the smoke from my lungs. We stepped out into the snow, the orange glow of the burning house illuminating the backyard. I looked up at the window of the master study. It was dark behind the security glass. Vanessa was in there looking out, seeing us standing in the snow. She was banging on the glass, mouthing words I couldn't hear. I turned my back on her. I walked toward the driveway, toward the truck where my granddaughter was waiting. I had one more rescue to make. And this time, I wasn't going to fail. The cold night air hit us like a physical blow as we stepped out of the basement. The snow was illuminated by the inferno raging upstairs. The master bedroom window was glowing a terrifying orange against the black sky. Vanessa was trapped in the study, safe for now. But the house, the legacy I had built with my own hands, was dying. It was cracking and popping as the fire ate through the dry timber framing. But I did not have time to mourn wood and plaster. My war was not over. Gavin was stumbling ahead of me in the snow. He was holding his crushed right hand against his chest, his expensive coat stained with soot and blood. He looked broken. He looked defeated. I thought the fight was gone from him. I thought he was just waiting for the handcuffs. But I forgot the first rule of dealing with vermin. A rat is most dangerous when it sees a way out. We were halfway down the driveway when the sirens started. Not the fake ones. I had played over the intercom, but real ones. distant wailing banshees cutting through the winter wind coming from the highway. The silent alarm from the safe had done its job. The cavalry was coming, but the sound did not make Gavin surrender. It triggered something primal in his reptile brain. He stopped dead in his tracks. He looked at the flashing blue lights reflecting off the low clouds in the distance. Then he looked at the truck. My Ford F-150 was sitting there dark and silent, a fortress of steel amidst the snow. Chloe was inside, locked in the passenger seat, watching the house burn, watching her grandfather march her father out into the cold. Gavin's head snapped toward me. His eyes were wide, wild, devoid of humanity. He realized he was going to prison for life. He realized there was no talking his way out of this. The money was locked away. The wife was dead. The house was burning. He had nothing left to lose. "Give me the keys," he screamed over the wind, extending his good hand. "Give me the truck keys, Thaddeus." I stood my ground, reaching into my pocket, gripping the keys tight. "You are not going anywhere, Gavin. It is over. Sit down in the snow and wait." "No," he shrieked, spitting saliva and blood. "No, I am not dying here." And then he ran. He did not run at me. He ran at the truck. My heart hammered a warning against my ribs, a sharp, jagged pain that stole my breath. It was the poison. It was the stress. It was 72 years of gravity trying to pull me down. But I forced my legs to move. I forced my boots to churn through the deep snow. I was running a race I could not win against a man 30 years younger than me, but I had to try because the prize was my granddaughter's life. Gavin reached the truck first. He didn't try the handle. He knew it was locked. He didn't ask Chloe to open it. He was past asking. He reached into his coat pocket with his left hand and pulled out a knife. It was a tactical folding knife with a serrated black blade, the kind he bought to look tough when he went camping once a year. He flicked it open. "Gavin!" "No," I roared, my voice tearing at my throat. He didn't listen. He grabbed the side mirror of the truck with his broken hand, screaming in pain, but using the leverage to pull himself up. He swung the knife handle, hammering the heavy metal pommel against the passenger window. Crack! The safety glass held for a second, spider webbing into 1,000 white lines. Chloe screamed inside the cab, a muffled, terrified sound that made my blood run cold. Gavin hit it again, harder, fueled by the madness of a man who sees his own extinction. Smash! The window gave way, showering the interior of the cab with diamonds of glass. The cold wind rushed in, violating the sanctuary I had created for her. I was 10 feet away, gasping for air, my chest feeling like it was wrapped in barbed wire. I saw Gavin reach through the broken window. He was reaching for the door lock. He was reaching for her. "No, Grandpa!" Chloe screamed, her voice high and piercing. "Help me!" Gavin grabbed her by the hood of her pink winter coat. He yanked her violently, dragging her small body over the center console, pulling her through the broken window glass, shards tearing at her clothes. "Let her go," I shouted, stumbling forward, my legs heavy as lead. "Let her go, Gavin. She is your daughter." He didn't care. He hauled her out of the truck, dropping her into the snow. She scrambled, trying to run to me, but he was faster. He grabbed her hair, pulling her back, jerking her head up. I stopped 5 feet away, freezing in place because I saw the glint of steel. Gavin was on his knees behind her, his chest heaving, his breath coming in white clouds. He had his left arm wrapped around her neck, choking her, pulling her back against his chest, and in his left hand, pressed tight against the soft skin of her throat, was the knife. The blade was steady, the hand holding it was shaking, but the edge was sharp enough to kill in a heartbeat. "Stay back!" he screamed, his voice cracking, his eyes darting between me and the approaching sirens. "Stay back or I will cut her. I swear to God, Thaddeus, I will open her up." The world narrowed down to that blade. It was the only thing that existed. The burning house behind me, the sirens in the distance, the cold biting my skin, it all faded away. All I saw was the terrified eyes of my granddaughter and the black metal touching her neck. I put my hands up slowly, showing him my empty palms. My lungs were burning, my heart was skipping beats, fluttering like a dying moth, but I made my face a mask of calm. I pushed the pain down deep, locking it away in the same place I kept my grief. "Okay, Gavin," I said, my voice low and steady. "Okay, you win. Do not hurt her. She is innocent. Give me the keys." He spat, pressing the knife harder. A small drop of blood appeared on Chloe's neck, a bright red bead against her dark skin. It was the most horrifying thing I had ever seen. I reached into my pocket slowly, very slowly. creating no sudden movements, asking my trembling fingers to cooperate. I pulled out the keys to the truck. The silver fob glinted in the firelight. "Here," I said, holding them up. "Here are the keys. Take the truck, Gavin. Take it and go. Just let her go. She will slow you down. You cannot drive and hold her at the same time. Let her walk to me." He hesitated, looking at the keys, then at the road. The sirens were louder now. The police were maybe 2 minutes away. He was doing the math in his head, the frantic calculus of a desperate man. "Throw them," he commanded. "Throw them in the snow." By my feet, I tossed the keys. They landed with a soft thud in the powder near his boot. "Now back up," he yelled. "Back up to the house, back up to the fire." I took a step back, moving slowly, keeping my eyes locked on his. I saw the indecision in his face. He wanted to let her go. He wanted to grab the keys and run, but he was afraid that the moment he released her, I would attack him. He was afraid of the old man he had tried to kill. He was right to be afraid. Chloe was crying silently now, tears streaming down her face, freezing on her cheeks. She was looking at me, pleading with her eyes, trusting me to fix this, like I fixed her broken toys. But this wasn't a toy. This was life and death, and I was terrified I was going to fail her. Gavin shifted his weight, trying to scoop up the keys without letting go of the girl. It was awkward. He had to use his broken hand to hold her while he reached with his knife hand, or he had to kneel lower, exposing his neck. I tensed my muscles, preparing to spring, preparing to trade my life for hers. If I could just get my hands on him, if I could just deflect the blade for 1 second. But then the universe intervened, or maybe it was just physics. As Gavin reached for the keys, his broken hand, the one I had crushed with the pliers, spasmed. The pain must have been blinding, terrifying. His grip on Chloe's coat loosened for a fraction of a second. Chloe didn't wait. She didn't hesitate. She did exactly what I had taught her to do. If a stranger ever grabbed her, she bit him. She sank her teeth into his forearm, right through the expensive wool of his coat, biting down with all the strength of an 8-year-old fighting for her life. Gavin screamed, jerking his arm back reflexively, pulling the knife away from her throat. "Run! Chloe!" I roared, launching myself forward. She scrambled away, crawling through the snow toward the trees. Gavin swung the knife wildly, missing her by inches. He scrambled for the keys, grabbing them from the snow. He didn't chase her. He knew he didn't have time. He knew I was coming. He lunged for the driver, side door of the truck, throwing it open. He jumped in, jamming the key into the ignition. I hit the side of the truck just as the engine roared to life. I grabbed the door handle, trying to rip it open, but he had hit the lock inside. He gunned the engine, the tires spinning on the ice, throwing slush into my face. He was getting away. He was going to leave me here with a burning house, a dead wife and a traumatized child. He was going to escape justice. "No," I whispered, gripping the side of the truck bed as he peeled out. "No, you don't." My hand brushed against something in the bed of the truck, something I had left there 3 days ago when I came back from the job site. It was my old Remington 870 shotgun case, the one I kept in the truck for emergencies, the one Vanessa hadn't found because she only looked in the gun cabinet. Gavin hadn't seen it. He was too busy looking at the road. The truck fishtailed, sliding sideways toward the gate. Gavin was struggling to control it with one hand. I didn't run after him. I couldn't run anymore. My heart was finally giving out. I fell to my knees in the snow, my chest exploding with pressure, black spots dancing in my vision. But I wasn't done. I crawled toward the truck bed as the vehicle spun, trying to find traction. I reached over the side, my fingers clawing at the plastic latches of the gun case. He was 30 yards away now, straightening out, heading for the open gate, heading for freedom. I got the case open. My hands knew the shape of the steel in the dark. I pulled out the shotgun, racking the slide. It was loaded. I always kept it loaded. I wasn't a builder anymore. I wasn't a father. I wasn't a victim. I was a hunter. I raised the shotgun, resting the heavy barrel on the tailgate of the truck for stability. I lined up the sights, focusing through the pain, focusing through the tears. I aimed not at the tires, not at the engine. I aimed at the driver. Gavin thought he had won. He thought he was faster. He thought he was smarter. But he forgot one thing. He forgot that you never turn your back on a man who has nothing left to lose. I took a deep breath, holding the freezing air in my lungs, steadying my shaking hands. "For Beatrice," I whispered, and I pulled the trigger. The truck had slammed into the heavy iron gate post a few seconds ago. The sound of crumpling metal was sickening, a screech of steel that echoed through the winter night. Gavin had tried to ram his way out, but he forgot that I built that gate. I sank the posts 6 feet deep into concrete reinforced with rebar. He thought he was driving a tank, but he was just driving a coffin. Steam was hissing from the radiator, wrapping the front of the truck in a white cloud. Gavin kicked the driver's side door open, stumbling out into the snow. He was dazed, blood running down his forehead from where his head had hit the steering wheel. He looked wild, desperate, a trapped animal realizing the trap has no exit. I stood 10 meters away. My boots were planted deep in the snow, acting as anchors for my swaying body. The Remington 870 shotgun felt impossibly heavy in my hands. It was just 7 pounds of steel and wood, but to a man having a heart attack, it felt like I was holding up the sky. My left shoulder, the one Gavin had shattered with the bat, was useless, screaming in agony every time I shifted my weight. I had to prop the barrel of the gun on my good arm, using my forearm as a rest. Gavin saw me. He froze. The red tail lights of the truck cast a bloody glow over the snow between us, illuminating his face. He saw the barrel. He saw the look in my eyes. And for the first time tonight, he didn't see a victim. He saw his judgment. He didn't run. Not at first. He just stared, paralyzed by the sudden reversal of fortune. Then his eyes darted to the right, toward the woods, toward the darkness. I have to shoot him. The thought was cold and clinical, detached from the burning in my chest. If I let him go, he vanishes. He disappears into the woods, and maybe he comes back. Maybe he comes for Chloe later. I cannot take that risk. I have to end it. I raised the stock to my cheek, resting my face against the freezing wood. I closed my left eye, trying to align the bead of the sight with the center of his chest. But I couldn't do it. My vision was swimming. The world was tilting sideways, blurring at the edges. The orange glow of the house fire behind me was dancing in my peripheral vision, throwing off my depth perception. My hands were shaking. It wasn't fear. It was the poison. It was the exhaustion. My muscles were misfiring, spasmodic tremors running down my arms, making the barrel of the shotgun draw circles in the air. I gritted my teeth, biting down until I tasted blood. Focus. Thaddeus. Focus. Suddenly, I wasn't standing in my driveway anymore. I was 12 years old, standing in a damp forest in Georgia. The air smelled of pine needles and damp earth. My father was kneeling beside me, his large, warm hand resting on my shoulder. We were hunting deer, helping to put meat on the table for a winter that promised to be lean. "Easy, son," my father whispered, his voice echoing across 60 years of time. "Do not fight the gun. Let it be part of you. You are shaking because you are holding your breath. Do not hold it. Breathe." I inhaled sharply, the freezing Minnesota air filling my lungs, stabbing at my ribs. "Breathe out," my father said slowly, gently. "Now wait for the pause. The empty space between the exhale and the inhale. That is where you find the stillness and the heart. Thaddeus, listen to your heart. Do not pull the trigger when it beats. Pull it in the silence between the thumps." I listened inside my own chest. My heart was not beating in a rhythm anymore. It was fluttering, a chaotic bird trapped in a cage. Thump, 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 pause, thump, thump. I needed that pause. I needed that split second of silence. Gavin turned. He started to run, scrambling over a snowbank, moving toward the tree line. He was 10 meters away, then 12, then 15. I exhaled, a long, ragged breath that steamed in the air. The world seemed to slow down. The wind faded. The roaring of the fire dampened. Thump. I waited, tracking his moving form with the swaying barrel. Thump. My vision cleared for a microsecond, a tunnel of clarity in the gray. Thump. Silence. I squeezed the trigger. Boom! The recoil was brutal. It kicked into my bad shoulder like a mule, slamming me backward. The pain was so intense it blinded me for a second, a white-hot flash that severed my connection to reality. I dropped to my knees in the snow, the shotgun falling from my numb fingers. I gasped, clutching my chest, waiting for the darkness to take me, waiting for my heart to finally stop, but it didn't. It gave a hard, painful lurch and kept beating. I opened my eyes, blinking through the tears and the smoke. I looked toward the tree line, expecting to see Gavin lying face down in the snow, a red stain spreading around him. But Gavin was still standing. I had missed. The slug had gone wide, pulled high, and to the left by my shaking hands. Gavin had stopped running. He was standing there looking back at me, checking his body, realizing he was alive. A slow, twisted smile started to spread across his bloody face. He started to laugh, a manic, high-pitched sound. "You missed, old man," he screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You missed. You are finished." He turned to run again, confident now, knowing I was empty, knowing I was broken, but I hadn't missed everything. Behind Gavin, looming over the path he was trying to take, was the old oak tree. It was a massive, ancient thing that had been dead for 2 years. I had meant to cut it down last summer, but Beatrice asked me to leave it. She said the owls liked to nest in the hollow trunk. It was dry, brittle, and heavy with ice from the storm. The 12-gauge slug hadn't hit Gavin, but it had slammed directly into the main fork of that dead tree, hitting the precise spot where the rot was deepest. The kinetic energy of the heavy lead slug shattered the dry wood, acting like a wedge. Crack! The sound was louder than the gunshot. It sounded like a clap of thunder right above our heads. Gavin stopped, looking up. The massive branch, thick as a man's torso and heavy with ice, sheared off from the trunk. It fell. In slow motion, a dark hammer dropping from the sky. Gavin tried to dive. He tried to scramble sideways, but deep snow is not forgiving. Thud. The earth shook. The branch landed directly across his legs and lower back, pinning him instantly to the frozen ground. The impact drove the air from his lungs with a wet grunt. Ah! The scream that followed was not the scream of a bully. It was the scream of a man being broken. Gavin thrashed, clawing at the snow, trying to push the massive weight off his body. But the branch was immovable. It was nature. Judgment pinning him down. I sat there on my knees, watching him struggle, watching the snow turn red around him, not from a bullet but from the consequences of his own escape path. I did not feel joy. I did not feel triumph. I just felt a deep, exhausting relief, Grandpa. The voice was small, terrified, coming from the truck. I turned my head. Chloe was climbing out of the broken window. She fell into the snow, scrambling up, running toward me, her pink coat flapping in the wind. "Chloe," I rasped, holding out my good arm. She didn't look at her father screaming under the tree. She didn't look at the burning house. She ran straight to me, diving into my chest, burying her face in my coat. I wrapped my arm around her, holding her tight, smelling the smoke in her hair, feeling her small heart beating against mine. "I got you, baby," I whispered, rocking her back and forth in the snow. "I got you. You are safe." We sat there huddled together in the driveway, illuminated by the headlights of the crashed truck and the glow of the fire. The sirens were close now, deafeningly close. Blue and red lights began to dance across the snow, reflecting in the tears on my cheeks. I looked over at Gavin one last time. He had stopped screaming. He was just whimpering now, pinned by the tree I had meant to cut down, watching the police cruisers turn into the driveway. My father was right, I thought, closing my eyes and resting my chin on Chloe's head. You have to wait for the silence, but sometimes God aims the gun for you. The sirens were getting louder, cutting through the winter night like knives, but they were still a mile away, struggling through the unplowed roads. For the next few minutes, there was no law on this property except the law of gravity and the law of Thaddeus Collier. I looked down at Gavin. He was still pinned under the massive oak branch, whimpering in the snow. The impact had broken his leg. I could tell by the unnatural angle of his shin bone tearing through his trousers. But he was alive. He was conscious. And he was looking at me with the eyes of a man who expects mercy simply because he is begging for it. "Help me," he choked out, reaching toward me with his good hand. "Get it off me. Thaddeus, please, my leg. It is broken." I did not move the branch. I did not call for medical aid. I turned to Chloe, who was still clinging to my coat, shivering not from the cold but from the shock of having a knife held to her throat. "Chloe, listen to me," I said, my voice soft but firm. "Need you to go sit in the back of the ambulance when it gets here, but right now I need you to look at the moon. Can you do that for Grandpa? Look at the moon and count the stars. Do not look down. Do not look at your father." She nodded. her big eyes filled with trust. She turned her back on the carnage, staring up at the cloudy sky, trying to find light in the darkness. I turned back to Gavin. I reached into the tool belt that was still strapped to my waist and pulled out a bundle of heavy-duty zip ties, the kind we used on construction sites to bundle rebar, the kind that do not break. I knelt down in the snow beside him. "What are you doing?" Gavin stammered, trying to pull away. I grabbed his hands, forcing them behind his back. He screamed as I wrenched his broken finger, but I didn't stop. I cinched the zip tie tight, hearing the plastic zip sound that signaled the end of his freedom. Then I did the same to his ankles, binding them together. Then I grabbed the branch pinning him. I put my good shoulder under it and heaved. It was heavy, soaked with water and ice, but adrenaline is a powerful thing. I lifted it just enough for him to slide out. He scrambled backward, dragging his broken leg, crying out in agony. He thought I was freeing him. He thought the nightmare was over. "Thank you," he gasped, lying on his back, panting. "Thank you, Thaddeus. I knew you wouldn't let me die." "Get up," I said. He looked at me confused. "I cannot walk. My leg. Drag yourself." Then I ordered, pointing toward the backyard, pointing toward the floodlights that had flickered back on as the backup generator finally cycled through its emergency restart. The yard was illuminated again, revealing the scene of the crime, the 2 holes in the ground, the blue tarp. "Where are we going?" Gavin whispered, terror creeping back into his voice. "We are going to visit your wife," I said. I reached down and grabbed the collar of his coat. I didn't wait for him to crawl. I dragged him across the snow, his broken leg trailing behind him, leaving a furrow in the white powder. He screamed, begging me to stop, begging for the police, but I was deaf to his pleas. We reached the holes. The first hole was the small one, the one he had forced my 8-year-old granddaughter to dig, the one intended for her small body. I looked at it, and I felt a fresh wave of hatred so pure it almost blinded me. Then we reached the second hole, the one covered by the blue tarp. I dropped Gavin in the snow beside it. He tried to crawl away, but his bound legs held him fast. He lay there looking at the tarp, looking at the shape beneath it. "Open it," I said. "No," he sobbed, shaking his head. "No, please. I cannot." I reached down and ripped the tarp away. Beatrice was there, lying exactly as I had found her. The frost had settled on her face, making her look like a statue carved from diamond. Her eyes were closed, her expression peaceful, despite the violence of her death. I knelt beside her, ignoring Gavin, ignoring the burning house, ignoring the pain in my own chest. I took off my glove and touched her cheek one last time. It was hard and cold as stone. "You did this," I whispered to Gavin, not shouting, just stating a fact. "You looked at this woman, the woman who welcomed you into her home, who cooked for you, who defended you, and you decided she was worth less than a cryptocurrency debt. You decided she was disposable. I didn't mean to." Gavin cried, snot and tears running down his face. "It was an accident." I stood up, towering over him. "There are no accidents with shovels. Gavin, you dug this hole, you planned this grave." I looked at the third hole, the one that was half dug, the one intended for me. "You like digging holes?" I asked, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "You seem to have a passion for excavation." "Please, Thaddeus, the cops are here, I can hear them. Just let me wait here." "No," I said, shaking my head. "The cops will take you to a warm cell. They will give you a lawyer. They will give you a meal. You do not deserve warmth. Not yet. You need to understand what you did. You need to feel." The cold, I reached down and grabbed him by the waist of his belt. He screamed, thrashing, trying to bite me, but he was weak and I was fueled by the wrath of a husband. I dragged him to the edge of the hole where Beatrice lay. "You wanted her out of the way," I said. "You wanted her underground. Well, here is your chance to be close to her." I pushed him. He tumbled over the edge, falling into the shallow grave, landing with a heavy thud right next to the frozen body of my wife. "No!" he screamed, scrambling, trying to climb up the muddy walls, but with his hands tied and his leg broken, he slid back down. He was trapped in the earth he had disturbed, trapped with the victim of his greed. "Look at her!" I roared, standing on the edge of the grave, looking down at him. "Look at her face, Gavin. Look at the woman you killed." He squeezed his eyes shut, screaming like a banshee, trying to curl into a ball, trying to get away from the cold touch of her body. "Open your eyes," I commanded, kicking a spray of snow down onto his face. "Do not look away. This is your life now. This cold, this dirt, this silence. This is what you bought with your $5 million. I stood there like a sentinel guarding the grave, waiting for the lights. The blue and red strobes were reflecting off the trees, now sweeping across the yard, illuminating the scene in flashes of color. Gavin was sobbing uncontrollably down in the hole, begging Beatrice for forgiveness, begging me for mercy, begging God for a rewind button. But there is no rewind button in life. There is only the path you build and the path you walk. I turned my back on the hole. I walked over to the small pile of dirt by Chloe's grave. I picked up the pink plastic shovel she had been using. I held it in my hand, feeling the cheap plastic, feeling the weight of the trauma my granddaughter would carry for the rest of her life. I walked back to the grave where Gavin lay. I tossed the pink shovel down into the hole. It landed on his chest. "Keep it," I said. "You might need it to dig. You're way out of hell." Then I walked away. I walked toward the driveway where the first police cruiser was skidding to a halt. I walked toward my granddaughter. I walked toward the rest of my life, leaving the trash where it belonged in the dirt. The driveway was no longer a dark tunnel of snow and wind. It had become a chaotic sea of flashing lights. Blue and red strobes bounced off the pine trees, creating a disorienting disco effect against the backdrop of the burning house. The first vehicle to skid to a halt wasn't the police. It was the private security firm, Titan Protection, responding to the silent duress alarm from the safe. Two large men in tactical gear jumped out, weapons drawn, scanning the perimeter. I stayed seated in the snow, clutching Chloe tight against my chest. I laid the shotgun down in front of me, visible and open, the universal sign of surrender. I wasn't a threat anymore. I was just a grandfather trying to keep a child warm. "Thaddeus Collier," one of the guards shouted, recognizing me. He lowered his weapon slightly, moving fast toward us. "Mr. Collier, are you hurt?" "I am fine," I rasped, my voice ruined by smoke and screaming. "Secure the perimeter. There is a man in the backyard and a woman locked in the master study. The house is structurally compromised." Then the police arrived, a swarm of squad cars filling the long driveway, sirens dying down into chirps and squawks. Uniformed officers spilled out confusion written on their faces. They saw the fire. They saw the crashed truck. They saw the old man in the snow. A sergeant, a thick-set man with a gray mustache, approached me cautiously. "Sir, I need you to step away from the weapon and keep your hands visible." I did as I was told, helping Chloe to her feet. She buried her face in my coat, refusing to look at the lights, refusing to look at the world. "It is okay, baby," I whispered to her. "The cavalry is here." Paramedics rushed forward, wrapping us in thermal blankets, checking my vitals, checking Chloe for frostbite. They tried to put me on a stretcher, but I refused. I wasn't going to a hospital. Not yet. I had evidence to deliver. I called the sergeant over. He looked overwhelmed, trying to coordinate the fire department trucks that were just now rumbling up the drive. "Sergeant," I said, reaching into my pocket. My hand brushed against the cold metal of the USB drive, the last gift my wife had given me. I pulled it out, holding it up like a diamond. "This is what happened tonight," I said, handing it to him. "This is everything. My wife, Beatrice. She found this. She died protecting it." "What is it?" the sergeant asked, looking at the small silver drive. "It is the truth," I said. Beatrice hadn't just found a toxicology report. She had done something. I hadn't thought of something brilliant and devastating. She had installed a hidden nanny cam in the living room 2 weeks ago. Not to watch the staff, but to watch me because she was worried about my health. She wanted to see if I was sleepwalking or falling. Instead, she caught them. I told the sergeant what was. On that drive, I hadn't seen it yet, but I knew Beatrice's letter had confirmed it. The video would show Gavin mixing the powder into my coffee. It would show Vanessa sitting on the sofa laughing about how long it was taking for the old man to kick the bucket. It would show them discussing the debts, the insurance, the timeline. It was premeditated, cold-blooded murder recorded in high definition. Beatrice had tried to take this drive to the police tonight. That was why they killed her. She was the witness. They couldn't silence. While I was talking to the sergeant, a shout went up from the backyard. "Over here, we have a body." I watched as 4 officers ran toward the holes in the ground, their flashlights cutting through the smoke. They found Gavin lying in the grave next to Beatrice, screaming for help, his voice hoarse and broken. "Get me out," he was yelling. "Get me away from her. She is looking at me." They shined their lights down into the pit, illuminating the horror of it. The sergeant's face went pale. He looked at me, then back at the hole. "He is alive," I said simply, barely watching. "He is tied up. He is not going anywhere." I watched as they hauled Gavin out. He was a mess, covered in mud and snow. His expensive coat ruined his leg, dragging uselessly behind him. He was the arrogant man who had swung a baseball bat at me an hour ago. He was a sobbing wreck, hyperventilating, terrified. He saw me standing by the ambulance wrapped in a blanket. "She made me do it," he screamed, pointing a shaking finger toward the burning house. It was Vanessa. "It was her idea. I just wanted to pay the debt," she said. "You wouldn't feel a thing, Thaddeus." She said it was mercy. I didn't say a word. I just looked at him with the same indifference I would show a termite I was exterminating. He was trying to trade his wife for a plea deal, trying to salvage some scrap of his life. But the USB drive in the sergeant's pocket was a nail in his coffin that no lawyer could pry loose. Then the firefighters moved in. The house was blazing now. The roof of the east wing already collapsing, sending showers of sparks into the night sky. But the master study was built like a bunker. It was holding. The fire crews brought out the heavy tools, hydraulic spreaders and saws, intending to breach the external wall of the study from the balcony ladder. I watched them work, sparks flying as the saw bit into the security shutters. It took them 20 minutes to cut through. 20 minutes where Vanessa sat inside that steel box, listening to the fire, listening to the sirens, wondering if she had won or lost. When they finally popped the door open, a cloud of smoke billowed out, followed by a figure stumbling into the lights. It was Vanessa. She was covered in soot. Her hair singed, her silk blouse torn. But she was alive. She didn't look relieved to be rescued. She looked furious. She scrambled down the ladder, helped by a firefighter. And the moment her feet touched the ground, she started scanning the crowd, looking for someone to blame. "Where is he?" she shrieked, pushing the medic away. "Where is that old bastard?" She saw me standing by the ambulance, holding Chloe's hand. "He tried to kill me!" she screamed, running toward the police officers, waving her arms frantically. "Arrest him! He locked me in there. He set the fire. He has dementia. He is crazy. He killed Mom." She was performing, putting on the show of her life, crying fake tears, playing the victim card with the skill of a seasoned actress. She thought she could spin this. She thought she could use my age and my medical condition against me one last time. The sergeant stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "Vanessa Collier," he said, his voice hard and professional. "Yes," she panted, nodding eagerly. "Yes, that is me. Thank God you are here. He is dangerous. Officer, you have to take him away. He has a gun." The sergeant didn't look at me. He looked at her, staring deep into her eyes, looking for a soul and finding only a calculator. "You are under arrest for the murder of Beatrice Collier and the attempted murder of Thaddeus Collier. You have the right to remain silent." Vanessa froze. The act dropped. The mask slipped, revealing the ugly, terrified reality underneath. "What?" she whispered, stepping back. "No, you do not understand. He is the one who—" "We have the drive, ma-am." The sergeant interrupted, holding up the plastic evidence bag containing the silver USB, "The one your mother was holding. We know about the poison, we know about the insurance, and we have your husband's confession recorded on body cam from the backyard." Vanessa looked at the bag, then she looked at the burning house, then she looked at Gavin, who was being shoved into the back of a squad car in handcuffs, and finally she looked at me. For a second I saw my daughter again, the little girl who used to bring me drawings she made at school. But then that image burned away, replaced by the woman who had poured gasoline on her own father. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling, "please tell them. Tell them it is a mistake. I can fix this. We can fix this. I'll fix." Looked down at Chloe. She was watching her mother, the woman who had ignored her, the woman who had let her freeze in a hole, the woman who had chosen money over blood. Chloe didn't step toward her mother. She tightened her grip on my hand, pressing her face into my leg. I looked back at Vanessa. "I do not have a daughter," I said, my voice carrying clearly over the noise of the pumps and the radios. "My daughter died a long time ago. You are just a stranger who broke into my house. Take her away." Sergeant Vanessa started to scream, a raw, primal sound of denial as the officers grabbed her wrists, forcing them behind her back. The click of the handcuffs was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. Louder than the fire, louder than the wind. I watched them shove her into the car, watching her thrash and kick, fighting the consequences she had earned. The house behind me groaned, and a section of the second floor collapsed inward, sending a plume of sparks spiraling up toward the moon. "It is over," Chloe said, smoothing her hair, watching the police cars drive away, their lights fading into the distance. "It is finally over." We stood there in the snow watching the fire consume the past. The structure was gone, the wealth was gone, the family was gone, but the foundation, the iron will that had kept me alive, and the innocent life holding my hand that was still standing. And that was enough to start over. The conference room in the county jail was painted a color I would describe as institutional hopelessness. It was a gray that smelled of bleach and regret, usually reserved for plea bargains and final goodbyes. But today it was reserved for the reading of a will. I sat at the head of the long metal table wearing a black suit, the same suit I had worn to Beatrice's funeral 3 days ago. Beside me sat Mr. Henderson, my family attorney for 30 years, a man who had drafted the contracts for my first skyscrapers. Henderson kept his eyes on his papers, refusing to look at the two people being led into the room by armed guards. The sound of chains hitting the linoleum floor preceded them. Clink, drag, clink, drag. It was a heavy industrial rhythm. Vanessa walked in first. She was wearing an orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on her frame. Her hair, once perfectly styled, was pulled back in a messy bun, and her face was scrubbed clean of makeup, revealing the dark circles of a woman who had not slept since the fire. She looked at me with a mixture of defiance and desperation. She still thought she had a card to play. She still thought there was a loophole. Gavin shuffled in behind her. His right arm was in a heavy plaster cast strapped to his chest, and his leg was in a walking boot. He looked smaller, deflated like a balloon that had lost its air. He sat down without making eye contact, staring fixedly at his shackled hands. The guards locked them to the metal loops on the table and stepped back, standing guard by the door. "We are not here to discuss the criminal case," Henderson said, his voice dry as dust. "We are here to execute the estate of the late Beatrice Collier and to clarify the financial standing of Thaddeus Collier per the request of the defendants." Court-appointed counsel, Vanessa leaned forward, the chains rattling loudly. "I want to know about Mom." "Share," she said, her voice raspy from smoke inhalation. "She didn't sign the divorce papers, Dad. She died while still married to you. That means half the estate is hers, and as her legal heir, I am entitled to her portion regardless of the charges against me." I looked at her amazed by the sheer audacity of her greed. She was facing life in prison for murder, and she was still trying to balance the ledger. She thought the law was a game of technicalities she could win. Henderson adjusted his glasses, looking over the rim at Vanessa. "You are referring to the last will and testament dated 1995, correct? The one that divided her assets between you and your father." "Yes," Vanessa snapped. "That is the only valid will, actually," Henderson said, pulling a single sheet of paper from his briefcase. "That is incorrect." He slid the paper across the steel table. It was a printout from an online legal service notarized digitally, time-stamped and valid in the state of Minnesota. 3 weeks ago, Henderson continued, on the same day she discovered the toxicology report regarding your father's poisoning Beatrice Collier accessed her LegalZoom account. She executed an emergency codicil revoking all previous wills and testaments. Vanessa went pale. She tried to grab the paper, but her chains stopped her short. "What does it say?" she whispered. "It says," Henderson read, keeping his tone professional, "that due to the discovery of hostile actions taken against her husband, Beatrice Collier, hereby disinherits her daughter, Vanessa Collier, and her son-in-law, Gavin Miller." Completely disinherited. Vanessa gasped. The word hung in the air, sucking the oxygen out of the room. "You cannot do that. I am her daughter." "She did it," Henderson said. "And she did more. She established an immediate transfer of all her personal assets, her savings, her stocks, her jewelry, and her life insurance policy into a blind trust." A trust. Gavin looked up, his eyes gleaming with a faint flicker of hope. "Who is the beneficiary?" "The beneficiary is Chloe Miller," Henderson said. Your daughter Vanessa let out a breath, leaning back in her chair. "Well, that is fine. I am her mother. I will control the trust until she is 18. I can manage the—" "You will manage nothing." Henderson interrupted, cutting her off with a sharpness I had never heard him use before. The terms of the blind trust are explicit. The parents of the beneficiary are strictly prohibited from accessing, managing, or even viewing the assets. The trust is to be administered by a sole legal guardian until Chloe turns 25. And who is the guardian? Vanessa hissed, looking at me with pure venom. I leaned forward, placing my hands on the cold metal table. I am, I said. Vanessa screamed. It was a short, sharp sound of pure frustration. She lunged at the table, but the chains held her back. She had lost Beatrice money. She had lost the leverage. She had lost the ability to control her own daughter's financial future, but that is just... Mom. Money, she said, her eyes darting around frantically, calculating, searching for a new angle. What about your money, Dad? The company Collier Construction is worth $50 million. You cannot cut me out of that. You are still alive, and the courts will appoint a conservator for your assets once we prove you are mentally incompetent. We will fight the will. We will fight everything. I laughed. It was a low, rumbling laugh that felt good in my chest, clearing the last of the smoke, formed my lungs. You really did not do your homework, did you, Vanessa? I asked. I looked at Henderson. He nodded, pulling another document from his briefcase. It was a thick contract bound in blue leather. You were so busy poisoning me, I said, so busy trying to make me look senile that you forgot to check the business. Listings, I didn't come home early from Chicago because the meeting was canceled, Vanessa. I came home early because the meeting was finished. I slid the blue folder toward her. I sold it. I said. Vanessa stared at the folder, uncomprehending. You what I sold Collier Construction, I said, savoring every syllable. 3 days before I came home, I signed the final closing documents. I sold the entire company, the equipment, the contracts, the land, the brand name, everything. To a conglomerate based in Dubai. Sold it. Gavin whispered, his face turning the color of old ash. But the money, the wire transfer, $52 million, I said, nodding. The transfer went through the morning. I drove back. Vanessa, eyes widened. She was doing the math. She was realizing that the company she had hated, the company she claimed stole my attention, was now just a pile of liquid cash, and she thought she knew where that cash was. The safe, she breathed. Her eyes lit up with a manic gleam. The safe in the study, the one I was locked in. The money was in there, wasn't it? That is why you locked me in. You wanted to taunt me. I shook my head slowly, giving her a look of pity. You really think I would keep $50 million in a wall safe? Vanessa, you think I am that stupid? The safe was empty, I said, leaning back in my chair. Well, not empty. It held my old tax returns and a few love letters from Beatrice. But the money was never there. Where is it? She demanded, straining against her chains. Where is the money? Dad, you cannot hide it. I didn't hide it, I said. I gave it away. The silence in the room was absolute, vivid, and heavy. You gave it away, she whispered, her voice trembling. Every cent, I said, looking her dead in the eye. The morning the sale closed, I established a philanthropic endowment, the Thaddeus and Beatrice Collier Foundation. Do you want to know what the foundation supports? I waited, letting the question hang there, letting her sweat. It supports victims of domestic elder abuse, I said, and legal funds for families destroyed by greed. I watched the realization wash over her. She had killed her mother. She had tried to kill her father. She had traumatized her daughter, and she had burned down her childhood home. And for what? For nothing. Absolutely nothing. The fortune she had coveted was gone, donated to fight people exactly like her. And there is one more thing, I added, standing up, buttoning my jacket. The debt. Gavin flinched as if I had hit him. The $5 million. The crypto sharks. Since you are both going to prison for life without parole, I said, and since you have no assets, the people you owe money to are going to be very disappointed. They cannot foreclose on a prison cell, and I suspect that when they find out you killed your wife for an inheritance that does not exist, they are going to be very unhappy. Gavin started to cry softly, putting his head on the table. We are dead, he sobbed. They will reach us inside. They will kill us in there. I walked toward the door, stopping just before the guard opened it. I looked back at them one last time, the daughter I had raised and the son-in-law. I had tolerated sitting in their orange jumpsuits bound by chains, bankrupt in every sense of the word. I hope it was worth it, I said. Worth what? Vanessa whispered, tears finally streaming down her face, the real tears of a woman who realizes she has destroyed her own soul. The digging, I said. You dug 3 holes. Vanessa, now you have to live in them. I walked out of the conference room and heard the heavy steel door slam shut behind me, sealing them in with their debts and their demons. I walked down the long hallway toward the exit where the sunlight was streaming through the glass doors. Outside the air was cold and crisp. Minnesota winter at its finest. But standing there waiting for me by my new truck holding a cup of hot cocoa was Chloe. She looked up when she saw me and smiled. I walked out into the light, leaving the shadows behind. Forever, I had built a lot of things in my life, skyscrapers, bridges, homes. But walking toward my granddaughter, I knew that the most important thing I would ever build was her future. And this time, I would build it on a foundation that could never be shaken. The snow is finally melting in Minnesota. It has been 6 months since the night the sky turned orange and the snow turned red. The air is still crisp, but there is a scent of pine and thawing earth that tells me the worst is over. I stood quietly in the cemetery, my boots resting on green grass instead of ice. The black granite headstone was simple and strong, just like the woman sleeping beneath it. Beatrice Collier, beloved wife, fearless mother. It was the only lie on the stone. She wasn't just a mother. She was a warrior who had saved us all from beyond the grave. I felt a small, warm hand squeeze mine. I looked down. Chloe was standing beside me. She wasn't wearing that pink coat anymore. The one from that night was gone, burned in a barrel along with the memories attached to it. Today she was wearing a bright yellow jacket the color of daffodils. She wasn't looking at her feet and she wasn't shaking. She was looking straight at the headstone, her eyes clear and dry. "Grandpa?" she asked, her voice steady. "Do you think she can hear us?" I squeezed her hand back, feeling the strength returning to my own grip. My shoulder still aches when it rains, and I walk with a cane now. But I am standing upright. "Yes, baby," I said. "I think she hears everything, and I think she is smiling because she knows you are safe." We stood there for a long time, just the two of us, and the silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. It was the silence of a debt paid and a ledger balanced. The nightmares had stopped for Chloe about 2 months ago. Dr. Sterling said she is resilient, said she has an iron will just like her grandfather. But I know the truth. She has Beatrice's heart. That is what saved her. We walked back to the truck, a new one I bought last week. My old Ford was towed away, a twisted wreck of metal, just like Gavin life. We drove out of the cemetery and headed back to the property. The drive was quiet but comfortable. We didn't need to fill the air with noise. We understood each other now in a way most people never do. We were survivors. When we pulled into the driveway, the change was startling. The blackened ruins of the house were gone. My crews had cleared the debris weeks ago, hauling away the charred timber and the smoke-stained bricks. The basement had been filled in. The holes in the backyard, the ones that had haunted my sleep, were gone, smoothed over and seeded with new grass. The land was a blank canvas waiting for a new masterpiece. I parked the truck and we got out, walking over to the folding table I had set up near the old oak tree. The tree was still there, minus the branch that had crushed Gavin's legs. I decided to keep it. It was a reminder that nature always settles the score. On the table lay a set of blueprints. I unrolled them, weighting the corners down with stones. Chloe climbed up on the bench, kneeling so she could see the white lines. "Is this my room?" she asked, pointing a gloved finger at the corner of the drawing. "That is it," I said, tracing the line with my finger. "It is going to have a window seat facing the morning sun, and reinforced glass, and a lock, only you know the combination too." "And the basement?" she asked, looking at me. I shook my head. "No basement this time. We are building on a slab, solid concrete 3 feet thick. We are building up, not down. No more holes, Chloe. No more secrets. We are going to build a house where the light reaches every corner. A house with a foundation so strong that no storm and no person can ever shake it again." She smiled, and it was real. It reached her eyes. It was the best thing I had seen in 20 years. We are living in a rental cabin down the road while the construction starts. It is small and cozy, nothing like the mansion we lost, but it feels more like a home than that big house ever did last night. We sat by the fireplace, planning the garden. Beatrice loved tulips, so we are going to plant 1,000 of them. But before we could truly move forward, there was one last piece of business I had to attend to. I walked over to the mailbox at the end of the driveway. The mailman had come while we were at the cemetery. Inside was a single white envelope stamped with the seal of the State Correctional Facility. The return address name was V. Collier, prisoner number 89402. I didn't open it right away. I walked back to the table where Chloe was drawing flowers on the blueprints. I sat down heavy on the bench and looked at the envelope. It was light, but it felt heavy with audacity. I knew what was inside without reading it. My lawyer Henderson had told me she would write. She had exhausted her appeals. Her public defender had quit. She wanted money for a private attorney. She wanted money for the commissary. She probably wrote pages of excuses blaming Gavin, blaming the drugs, blaming me. I looked at Chloe. She was humming a song, creating something beautiful on the paper. She didn't ask about the letter. She knew Vanessa's name was not spoken in our house anymore. I took the envelope in my hands. My fingers were stiff but steady. I didn't tear it open. I didn't give her the satisfaction of reading her lies. I didn't want to know if she was sorry. I didn't want to know if she was suffering. Her suffering was no longer my concern. It was between her and the 4 walls she would stare at for the rest of her life. I folded the envelope once lengthwise. Then I folded the corners down, creating a sharp nose checking the symmetry, just like I would check a roofline. I folded the wings down, creasing the paper with my thumbnail, making the edges crisp. "What are you making?" Grandpa Chloe asked, looking up. "Just trash, baby," I said. "Just trash." I finished the paper airplane. It was sleek and aerodynamic, perfectly balanced. I stood up and walked over to the portable fire pit the workers had left burning to warm their hands. The flames were dancing orange and hungry. I held the airplane up, aiming it. At the heart of the fire, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I just felt done. I pulled my arm back and released it. The paper airplane caught the wind for a second, gliding smoothly through the cold spring air. It looked white and innocent against the blue sky. Then it dipped, diving straight into the fire. It caught instantly. The paper curled and blackened the seal of the prison, melting away. The words inside the pleas and the manipulation turned to ash in seconds, swirling up into the smoke, disappearing into nothingness. It was a sweet heat, a clean heat. I dusted my hands off and turned back to my granddaughter. "Ready to build?" I asked. She hopped down from the bench, grabbing a small trowel from the bucket. "Ready," she said. We started digging that afternoon. Not a grave, not a trap, but a trench for the footing of a new life. The soil was rich and dark, smelling of potential. And as I watched Chloe working beside me, strong and safe, I knew that Beatrice was right. The best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It is outliving them and being happy. The lesson I learned. People often say blood is thicker than water, but they forget that water can drown you just as fast if you do not learn to swim. I spent 72 years building foundations of concrete and steel, thinking that was enough to protect my family. I was wrong. The strongest foundation is not money or heritage. It is character. I learned that evil does not always look like a monster. Sometimes it has your eyes and your last name. But I also learned that love can skip a generation. Saving my granddaughter was not just a duty. It was my second chance to finally build a home that no storm and no betrayal can ever tear down. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever had to cut toxic family out of your life to save your own sanity, hit that like button and subscribe. Let me know in the comments. If you think I was too hard on Gavin or if he got exactly what he deserved, I read every single comment. Stay safe out there, and remember, protect your peace at all costs. See you in the next story.